Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
I hope everybody's having a great Friday. Said they were making fun of me because I had blue jeans on. I said, well, I started off my Friday morning. My Rotary Club meets at 7 a.m. So I had a Rotary Club meeting, then I had eggs and issue over in Madison County. Said I knew we'd be talking about agriculture, and I was coming to an ag facility. So I said, my God, I'm wearing blue jeans. Said I'm gonna make sure I'm taken care of here. Said Chairman Jaspers gave me the reins to start our meeting off this morning. But before I do, I want to call on one person sitting over here in this corner, and that's our chairman of the county commission here in Jackson County, Mr. Tom Crow. Tom and some of his counterparts on the board of commission said, we got the votes and we got the desire, and we're going to build an ag facility. And so, Tom, why don't you touch on the ag facility just a little bit and say, welcome our group.
Thank you for being here this morning and giving us the opportunity to host this meeting. A lot of distinguished people here, even Frank over there. So, but we did build this thing. It's a little over a year old. We have had probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 animals through here in the show ring, which is out there where the Christmas party's fixing to take care of. But we got some artificial carpet that goes down and pins that go out there, and we can have a animal show here on Saturday, and then by Monday it's ready for this. We have a great crew that will transfer from one thing to another. We've had gun shows, a wedding, have not had a funeral yet, but we are prepared for it whenever. And but if you have a chance to do take a look at it, one of the things that we're proud of as a county government is that we received almost $2 million in private money from industry here around the county into a government facility. That's unheard of, is to get that much private money to build something that's going to be a government building. But all of this stuff is for rent. Anybody that needs just this, if they need the whole building. We've had, like I said, we had a 3-ring circus in here. 2 weeks ago, we had a gospel singing one night, about 900 people. It was great. So a lot of different possibilities, and we do want you to come and enjoy it. If there's anything that we can help you with today, we somewhere around 12 o'clock we will have some boxed lunches for you. Frank was going to cook something hot, but he had to go to all those meetings today, so just got a box lunch. But they will be around 12 o'clock. Bathrooms are on the far side of the building, and anything we can help you with, feel free to ask us. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Chairman. The reason that we're meeting in the ag facilities, ag's a big part of Jackson County, but Jackson County is all about business. And the whole idea of the Airport Infrastructure Committee is, what do we do to promote business in Georgia through airport aviation and what's going on with it? So about a mile over the hill over here is Jackson County's airport. Said John, are you going to tell me a little bit about the airport?
Yeah, it's a great asset that we have. So here in Jackson County, a lot of our industry is based around I-85, going right there to the north part of the county. So with e-commerce exploding like it is, we got logistics coming in. We got you've seen electric vehicle industry take off, and so we're starting to see that here too. But the airport is a great asset. Without it, we would not have been able to land these great projects to Georgia, to this area. And so I'm just excited to see that we're giving it some attention. John
Scott is the economic development fellow for Jackson County, and they do mean business. They go after it in a big way, and for me, I'm lucky enough that y'all are in the 47th Senate District. So for me, I'm proud to represent Jackson County, and I'm really glad to have our group here. I know, it's kind of interesting. John talked about electric. Said one of the biggest projects that has come to our state, said right up the road, said we got a nice little battery plant. And I didn't ever put the two together till our last study committee meeting in Atlanta. Somebody talking about electric airplanes, and I'm thinking, that's going to be an interesting thing. I don't know if it'll fly or not, but it's a good concept. So the battery plant, they're going to. What was the total investment in the battery
Right now
plant?
they're at 2.7 billion.
$2.7 billion. So we're invested in the future in a long way here in Jackson County. Chairman Jasper said it's good to see you on a Friday, but you tell me you're going to leave early?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have to leave early.
Okay.
And, yeah, I do have to have another appointment in Atlanta, but, we're glad to be in Jackson County. When the chairman again talked about us being here, described the relationship you have with the community and the airport. We've all driven through Jackson County going to the Bulldog games. I live over in Jasper, but just looking at the logistics growth that y'all have here is amazing. How many square feet of storage,
I'm actually working on that total right now, but currently under construction is about 10 million square feet.
wow.
That's just really
So,
big.
so we appreciate, committee members and folks who are here. I know Chairman again, and I say this every time, but where's Ben? Ben, stand up and wave. We have great staff people at Abbey Day from the house right over here. We couldn't do it. We couldn't do it without them. And the big thing for me coming to these meetings, as we were talking just a minute in the hallway, I learn something every time, don't I, ma'am?
Yes, you do.
I'm not a pilot or anything, but just learning about approach and what y'all have to do to maintain the approach and cutting trees down and the FAA. I learned a lot, just a little bit more this morning, but look forward to learning more today. Mr. Chairman?
We're going to do something a little different this year. We're going to run through this meeting said we're going to run through our agenda, but the most important part on this agenda, I think, is going to be towards the end, that roundtable discussion. Because basically, we got to put together our thoughts for where do we want to go moving forward, in legislative and funding and what we're going to do. So for me, I hope that everybody, this is a participatory meeting. You don't sit here on your hands that you got a tongue, you got a brain. So I know there's a hell of a lot more brains on the other side of my mouth than on the back side. So for me, it is great to have everybody here. I'm going to go ahead and get started, but I did want to also introduce Kevin. Said if you would raise your hand. Said Kevin is a county manager, and having been a county manager in the neighboring county up the road, said I can tell you, said he's got a special place in heaven because he's already been through a lot of hell. Said and thanks for what you do, Kevin, to make things work here in Jackson County.
Appreciate what y'all do.
Thank you. Ben, I'm gonna let you kind of orchestrate for us.
Okay. Well, I believe the first presenter we have today is Bobby Paulson. Oh, sorry, who? Oh, Greg Booth, my mistake.
That's all right. Good morning, everybody. I'm here on behalf of Ed Bolin. You guys really invited Ed Bolin, our CEO and president of the National Business Aviation Association. And he is by far a lot better than myself in talking about our association, our industry, and putting it forward. So he asked me to read some written testimony to the Joint Committee on his behalf, and so that's what I'm doing today. Dear members of the Joint Study Committee, thank you for holding this meeting. My name is Greg Booth. I am the Southeastern Regional Representative for the National Business Aviation Association, MBAA. Just real quick, I can't tell you how many hotels and cities I've been to. Everybody thinks I'm the NBA scout for basketball. Looking for the next stars. I get that all the time. We are MBAA, in case you were wondering. I'm based in Atlanta, Roswell specifically, and I do enjoy Georgia. I've been here since '89, since started with Delta, so really enjoy the state. We'll be speaking on behalf of our 11,000 member companies, which MBAA represents. Ed Bolin, MBAA's president and CEO, regrets that he wasn't able to be here in person. Airport infrastructure and improvements are a great value to MBAA members, and we appreciate the Joint Committee's efforts and opportunity for MBA to provide input. Securing a stable and predictable funding stream is critical to continue to maintain current infrastructure, while at the same time investing to embrace the growth of the industry and prepare for the arrival of new entrants. We encourage the Joint Committee to recommend continue to invest in airport and aviation infrastructure throughout the state. To accomplish these goals, it is valuable for the state to continue to provide funds to assist airports to close the local match gap, enabling them to greatly benefit from federal grants and to provide funding for projects like lengthening runways, expanding ramps, building hangars, offering assistance to build new infrastructure necessary to accommodate new entrants like the electric aircraft we were just talking about earlier. As an introduction and background, business and general aviation, GA as we call it, industry in the United States includes all operations other than scheduled airline flights and the military. Nationally, our sector supports 1.2 million jobs and $247 billion in economic impact, with thousands of small and medium-sized businesses that generate over $77 billion in labor income. While the commercial airlines serve approximately 500 airports, GA can reach over 5,000 airports. And the communities nationwide providing a critical link. Regionally, business aviation is a vital part of Georgia's economy and transportation system, with numerous companies relying on our transportation as a critical part of conducting their business. Moving people and equipment, conducting medical flights, disaster relief, and humanitarian efforts. State airports and aviation infrastructure play a critical role in supporting business aviation and operations. MBAA has numerous members based at the airports in the state, and many throughout the country who rely on Georgia's aviation infrastructure to conduct their business. Large flight departments with company names we're all familiar with like Home Depot and Chick-fil-A, as well as individual owner pilots, such as Atlanta's aviation attorney, Alan Armstrong, and many others, all call Georgia airports their home base. Additionally, companies like Sanderson Farms, based in Laurel, Mississippi, and numerous others across the United States are examples of those who frequently fly into Georgia to conduct business. During the pandemic, Quest Diagnostics, with bases around the country, including Georgia, has been busy with their fleet of mostly single-engine turboprop aircraft transporting test samples to and from laboratory facilities. In addition to the traditional 91 operations mentioned, aircraft under fractional ownership, M135, passenger transport, and cargo rely on the state airports as well. Most companies relying on business aviation for their success and thus evaluate proximity to airports as they consider location for headquarters and other types of facilities. In addition to traditional jobs at these facilities, companies with aviation operations provide employment across a number of disciplines required for aviation operations themselves, providing significant economic impact to the area. Economic development, investment at the state level is of value to most business aviation operators, as they have a choice of multiple airports across the country as to where to base their facilities. States that have a strong aviation infrastructure base and offer competitive benefits are more attractive to businesses. Currently, domestic business aviation operations are mostly at pre-pandemic levels, with several of the leisure destinations exceeding their 2019 numbers. International traffic remains low down due to restrictions remaining in place. Charter operations have recently increased as more travelers choose private air transportation due to limited airline schedules and health safety concerns due to COVID-19. Business aviation's new and used aircraft market has been strong throughout the pandemic. I was at an event probably a couple months ago, and they said currently for aircraft to be purchased, you're looking 2 years out. So that's how strong the aircraft market is in business aviation, very strong. With only, I believe, 3% of the current active fleet up for sale. So it's very strong. Business aviation continues to be a good steward of the environment with industry goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. MBAA is leading the effort to reduce environmental impacts, including conducting flights using sustainable aviation fuels, creating more efficient routes, procedures, and use of airspace. Operators are also adopting sustainability strategies related to the ground support equipment and physical infrastructure. For SAF to be widely available at competitive prices, a blender's tax credit is needed to encourage investment in new production capacity. MBAA is advancing the SAF tax credit of up to $1.75 per gallon, which is included in the Build Back Better Act. The overall general aviation industry, in collaboration with the FAA, are also working through the transition to get to unleaded aviation gasoline. New entrants such as electric vertical takeoff and landing, eVTOL, as well as electric fixed-wing aircraft are likely to arrive at airports over the next 5 to 7 years as part of the advanced air mobility transportation system. This emerging technology will require updates to airport infrastructure such as charging stations, electrical infrastructure to support them. AAM is also expected to create new off-airport infrastructure in the form of vertiports. The FAA is currently in the process of developing vertiport standards. NBA is leading the effort on legislation at the federal level that will create a pilot program to offer planning and construction grants to support development and rollout of necessary infrastructure to support AAM operations, including public use airports, vertiports. MBA is also advocating expanding the existing tax credit for electric vehicle charging to include aviation charging installations. At the federal level, MBAA has been a long advocate of robust improvement AIP funding due to direct benefit it brings to general aviation airports and MBAA members alike. MBAA supported the CARES Act and the recent Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act and other legislation providing much needed additional funding to the airports. While the federal government invests heavily in our nation's airport infrastructure, most airports would not be able to take advantage of federal grants without the state's assistance for the local match. We recognize that Georgia is one of the states with a robust aviation department. Georgia DOT does a great job. Actually, Brian right here off to my left. And, sorry, lost my place. Georgia being a block grant state, the department also plays an important role in prioritizing distributing federal funds. Business aviation operates a diverse fleet of aircraft with capabilities to access the majority of public use airports in the state. Generally, airports with runway lengths of 5,500 or greater are preferred by medium-sized aircraft, and those are in the range of up to 50,000 pounds. Runways of 7,500 or greater are preferred by heavier jets that are over that 50,000 pound mark. Additional factors such as the presence of an air traffic control tower, types of airfield lighting, industrial instrument approaches available, and the level of fixed base operators and maintenance services available provided also play a role as the business aviation operators determine where to base their aircraft and which part to select as a destination. Hangar infrastructure has become an important factor as well, as demand continuously exceeds supply throughout the Southeast. Hangar tenants are looking for long-term leases to be able to recoup their investment into the structure, as well as ability to service, maintain, and self-fuel their aircraft, among other amenities such as co-located office space. In closing, the business aviation industry continues to be a vital part of the state aviation system and values the continued investment in the state has made to maintain and modernize and grow its aviation infrastructure to ensure future viability. We encourage the state to continue to provide funds to assist airports to close the local match gap, enabling them to greater benefit from federal grants and to provide funding for critical projects. We thank members of this joint committee for recognizing the importance of general and business aviation and considering airport infrastructure and improvements. And we look forward to continuing those discussions and engaging further where MBA's expertise can be helpful. We recognize the joint committee for its continued commitment to aviation in the state of Georgia. Thank you very much for doing it.
Thank you, Gary. So any of our committee members have questions for Mr. Walston? I do want to ask one thing. Sure. When you talk about net zero on emissions by 2050, I get the concept with electric, but all of them aren't going to be electric. So what do you do for those that are
Well, that's where the effort of SAF comes into play, where you're replacing traditional jet fuel with SAF, which can, in its purest form, reduce 80% of carbon.
I think I saw a commercial airliner actually using some of that in the flight just this past month. To the,
Correct. It's very, in the eastern U.S., it's harder to get. It's very hard to get, actually. The predominant refineries are on the West Coast right now. So that's why there needs to be an incentive for refineries to increase capacity of SAF throughout the entire U.S. to make it more broadly available, make it cheaper so that operators can opt in to the SAF effort. But we do have operators. We have an operator out at FTY who actually transports in by train SAF, so that 100% of their operation runs off SAF. So it's very impressive. So we do have members that are full in, and we're looking forward to a time where SAF is more prevalent throughout all the airport systems.
thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to working with the questions.
You're up, Bob.
Okay, good morning, committee members. It's great to be in the lovely state of Georgia. I'm Bobby Walston, the Director of the Division of Aviation from North Carolina, within our umbrella of North Carolina Department of Transportation, and also serve part-time in the North Carolina Air National Guard, which is now a C-17 wing in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I kind of travel the state. We're headquartered and based at Raleigh-Durham Airport. And again, it's a privilege to be here and talk one of the best topics there is, which is aviation. And I love to get out and share the great message. So happy to be here today. I was invited, Steve and I are colleagues from two different states, but both serve at the national level at the National Association of State Aviation Officials, and see each other quite frequently and talk to each other quite frequently. We're both block grant states, so we administer the federal dollars to our general aviation airports. And also good friends with Carol Comer, who I know is a popular name in this group and everyone in the years of service that she provided to this state. Prior to that, as well as Steve, they both were in North Carolina and serving at different capacities there. Carol actually worked in our Division of Aviation several years as an aviation safety specialist, doing all kinds of safety work at airports and flying around and having a good time before she figured out she wanted to move south. So anyway, happy to be here, and I'm going to ask Mike to come over and do a quick introduction. Sure himself.
Well, good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Good. My name is Mike Langen, President and CEO of the Raleigh-Durham Airport Authority, and I appreciate the opportunity to come before this committee and kind of share what the state of North Carolina actually did from a funding standpoint. So hopefully we'll be able to provide you some information. You can kind of learn from what we've done, and hopefully you can develop a program, hopefully similar to what we've actually got, because I think it's important for states to make investments in airports at the end of the day. You notice down here at the bottom, it's got two presenters, right? Two presenters. That's kind of interesting that we're both sharing this presentation, but we're really trying to signal something to you and tell you that this was really a collective effort from lots of different people within the state. This was just not commercial service airports. This is general aviation, commercial service, state of North Carolina Division of Aviation, and also the legislators all working collectively together to come up with the program that we will share with you today. So it takes a village to raise a barn. Well, it took a village to actually put this program in place in North Carolina. It took us several years. So we'll try to share some lessons learned that we got from that. Also, some ground rules regarding the Q&A session. Bobby and I, right before we got in here, we did a coin toss. I won the coin toss, so I handle all true or false questions. Bobby handles all the essay questions. Just so that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, great. I'm going to turn it back up to Bobby.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And as Mike said, we have collaborated a ton, and it's more than just the relationship we have on his airport, as we are tenant and based at Raleigh-Durham, and that's, of course, the capital area and how we serve. But we collaborate on a lot of different things, so it's just great to bring this together as a team effort. This is just high level what we're looking to talk about today. A brief overview of how we made the case for increased state investment for our airports, and also the result of that. So that's what we'll cover. I cannot stand before you as the Director of Aviation in North Carolina and not share a little bit of this legacy here. So we all know, and I'm looking for anyone that might be from Ohio in here because I'm ready for that too. But you know, this is where it all started out in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, out on the Outer Banks. You all have that same kind of beach type property and some islands and things out there. But this is just a fascinating story. And I will tell you, we leveraged this as that legacy of where aviation started, where they came to fly, and you know, just so many good piece parts to all of this. But next week, it'll be 118 years. So, I mean, it's just fascinating to pause for just a second and think about where aviation has taken us and what's the next 118 years going to be like. So, you know, I think an interesting comment I'll make about this and how it ties into aviation, but particularly airports, is this line across the bottom here is a wooden rail. And if you don't know any of that story there, the Wright brothers were bicycle repairmen, and so many components and piece parts of what they learned about working on bicycles was applied into this airplane. And down at the bottom were a couple of bicycle wheel hubs that actually were on the wooden frame that rolled down this wooden rail system here. That was the airport today, right? And so this is where we've come. So this is Western North Carolina General Aviation Airport. And I think we should be proud for the long distance that we've come. And again, just one can quickly think about how much progress has been made in this industry and what aviation has become to our nation and our you know, commerce and business. So you know, again, happy to discuss that. Okay, so moving into North Carolina, just a little bit about North Carolina's system. Much like Georgia, pretty robust system of general aviation airports and commercial service airports. There's 72 airports that are publicly owned and operated in North Carolina that are in our national plan. Basically what that means, they're eligible to receive federal support and federal funding. Of the 72 airports, 10 of those are commercial service airports. The busiest and largest is Charlotte Douglas as a large hub airport, Raleigh-Durham as a medium hub airport, Piedmont Triad is a small hub, as well as Asheville and Wilmington. And then we have 5 other commercial service airports that are considered non-hub, and that's in the classification of FAA. So very robust system. Every citizen in North Carolina, 94% of the population is within a 30-minute drive time to one of these airports. Big business. Airports and aviation mean big business in North Carolina. $61 billion annually of economic impact. It is a major driver and economic engine in our community, in our state. 10% of the state's GDP is generated by aviation, and you're looking at almost 400,000 jobs. So it's a powerful economic driver in the state. So in 2016, when we convened a task force, much similar to what you all are doing here today, we were well positioned to make the case of there are some great needs and we need some help. So we had just completed what's called a 20-year airport system plan, which is something that FAA supports and really it pushes that every state has. And we had just evaluated the needs in North Carolina at North Carolina airports. And we had estimated at that time with this study that general aviation airports, had over $1 billion in needs over the next 20 years. Also, the commercial service airports were looking at needs about 10 times that amount. In addition, we had been doing economic impact studies and reports since about 2006, really trying to understand and grapple with what is the impact of aviation in our airport system. And so we have been creating these reports and looking at it and refining and improving that process to what I feel like is a very, very strong process to get a handle on what the impact of our airports are. And so that's what generated that $61 billion. I think a real key point and message at this point is it was determined because as a part of this study, not only are we looking at economic impact, but we got a much better handle on what's the state and local tax revenue generated because of these airports. And so with that, at that current time, based on how much money the state was putting into airports, as a system of airports, we were looking at for every dollar the state was putting in, we were getting $23 in state tax revenue back. That's not a bad investment. And so, you know, we broke that down many different ways, but I tell you, that really is what I want you to you know, recognize there, and that was a big, big takeaway moment to express that to stakeholders. When the task force convened, our research showed that North Carolina airports faced, you know, this significant funding gap. And so you can see here, this just breaks down the GA and commercial at that particular time. We looked really closely at the next 7 years, and that's what this was based off of, but you can see the funding gap at that time was identified at about $82 million a year shortfall of what the state needed to be doing. So this time I'm going to turn it over now to Mike and let him give you an airport's perspective in North Carolina and talk more about the task force.
All right, thanks, Bobby. So first I want to talk a little about kind of headwinds that your airports are facing here in Georgia and airports all across the country. So this is a report that was done by Airports Council International North America. They do a capital needs analysis. And what they said is just for commercial service airports, the needs are about $25 billion a year. Now, the federal program comes in somewhere between, you know, $3.5 to $4 billion. So let's just round it up to $4 billion a year is what they're actually funding for this capital program across the country. Just had a new infrastructure bill, $1.2 trillion. Mike, that's got to have a big impact. It did, an additional $3 billion. But the shortfall is still $18 billion, and that's not just for this year. There's been multiple years where we have underfunded airports all across this country. And so there's a significant pent-up demand for additional infrastructure and replacing infrastructure in our communities. I'll give you a good example. At RDU, we're looking at about a $2 billion program between now and 2030. When we start looking at our debt capacity, I maxed out my debt capacity and my revenue generation, I still have a hole of about $500 million today, even with all this additional funding that's coming into the program. So there are significant needs for airports all across this country. So let's talk about this task force. And so in the 2013, 2014 timeframe, a lot of the commercial service airports, they were starting to reach out to elected officials and saying, we've got a need, we've got a need, we've got a need. The thing we didn't do a good job of is we couldn't quantify what the total ask was, how much we needed, how it was going to get paid for. We didn't have any of that information together. And we continued to work our way up to the governor, and the governor did a great thing. He said, hey, why don't we do this? Let's develop a task force. And that task force was represented by operators like myself, people like Bobby, users of the facilities, engineers, a group of people that are really kind of in this system, and we all got together. And these were kind of the four kind of key areas. There was more than this, but I'm going to kind of zone in on these four. So the first was really getting a sustainable funding model. 72 airports, making sure that we knew what the money was coming in. It is very difficult to plan for the development of your airport if you don't know where the cash is going to come from to pay for that critical infrastructure. And again, I put together an airport master plan that is 25 years. I know what we're going to do over the next 25 years for infrastructure. So having a reoccurring funding stream that we can plan against is going to be extremely important, because your airport's going to have to make tough decisions and prioritize. They won't be able to do everything. Develop strategies to maximize economic impact. Making an investment. Remember what Bobby said, at 23-1. Can you imagine going into your financial advisor at the beginning of the year and giving them $1 and putting it on the table and saying, wait back 12 months and I want 23 back? Can you imagine that? Well, that's what we're doing here. But that's what we're looking at as an economic impact. Where do we make those investments? We also look at effective and efficient grant process. We did not want to look like the FAA's program. It is very challenging to work through all the paperwork and all the requirements of that system. And so we really were looking for a streamlined process. And then finally, any recommendations, revisions to the Division of Aviation policies and programs. So that was kind of the high level when this task force came together back in the 2014 timeframe. What were the three kind of key takeaways at a very high level? First was strategic investment. We felt when we sent this report back to the elected officials, they needed to have some sort of reoccurring strategic investment, reoccurring sustainable funding. Targeted economic development. We started to see, I know the chairman has got a daughter that's up at Greensboro. I don't know if it's come out or made an announcement. There's another large announcement coming from Greensboro. And it's as a result of this targeted economic development at the end of the day for aerospace. And then, of course, training and technical assistance. So that's kind of a high level. With the report, I'm going to drill down kind of into the funding, because that's really where I participated, and that's really where my focus was at the end of the day. And so while these were recommendations, it didn't mean the legislators just took what we gave them and said, this is what we're going to do. But we spent a lot of time trying to figure out where should the money come from to actually pay for this investment at the end of the day. We looked at the rental car tax. The rental car tax, where, depending upon who did the calculation, somewhere between $70 to $80 million a year. We thought that might be a good source, but we tried to provide the elected officials, here's where we think those fundings can actually come from. It's from existing tax streams, not new tax streams, because again, I'm going to encourage everybody to think about this. This is an investment. Again, if you give me $1, I'm going to give the state of North Carolina, for commercial service airports, it's 30 to 1. But for our overall system, it's 23 to 1. Also trying to figure out how we offset. At the time, it was about an $82 million per year shortfall that we thought we had. And I will tell you, we were probably very low. As we started to pull together our capital improvement programs and shared that with Bobby, and the GA airports have done the same, that number is much larger than what that number was. But that's kind of what we came up from a task force standpoint to say, this is going to be challenging. We also continue to look at this as an entire system. We didn't just look at commercial service airports. We also talked about the smaller airports out there. And what we call Tier 1 or Tier 2 are those airports much smaller in the rural areas of North Carolina. We needed to make sure we took care of them. This program was everybody. It just wasn't one size. And of course, looking at kind of the local match, especially for the smaller airports, to make sure they had the local match to make sure they could get the federal funds at the end of the day. So that was kind of a big picture from a funding standpoint. So I'm going to let you look at this and see what the performance was at the end of this. And this is a little bit of a busy slide, so I'll try to help you walk you through it. So this was kind of 2014, 2015. $20 million is what we were investing. This is what it is 21 and 22, $130 million. That's a pretty nice little story. Look at this, 240% overall increase, 1,200% increase for commercial service airports at the end of the day. I'm going to talk about this zone right in through here, this dark green area, and this is really the commercial service piece. Bobby's going to kind of talk to you a little bit about this shade right in here, which winds up being the general aviation. You can see big jumps for general aviation as well. Now, I want to kind of start right here, because when we talk about it's a system, and there is some times where you've got to kind of what I call take a haircut and share with smaller airports, because it's an overall system at the end of the day. When we first started this, we told the General Assembly that, hey, there's over about $6 million a year that's being provided to commercial service airports. So for example, RDU would only get about $500,000 a year. That's all we would wind up receiving. We said we're willing to give that up and actually reallocate the general aviation if we could get a reoccurring program like what you actually see right here that we've actually got today. So that was a big deal. Last thing on this slide, kind of look at and see that they just approved the budget, and they've got a new capital infrastructure program that airports are able to participate in. On top of this number, there's an additional $115 million. The state of North Carolina gets it. Investing in airports is economic development, and there is a return for the state. It's important to think about this as an investment at the end of the day. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'm going to work you through the highlighted area, and this is kind of the 2018 timeframe. So our program historically was an earmark program. What you would do is you would hire a lobbyist. That lobbyist would then work with you and work with your elected officials, and if you could get the political votes behind it, you wind up getting some sort of allocation. In our particular case, first year out of the box, we got $21 million out of a $40 million program. That was earmarked for us. The rest of this was the smaller commercial service airports, and the allocation was based upon the economic activity. So you know the report that Bobby referred to. We continue to go back to that as a way to figure out a formula for how the distribution would wind up occurring. If you notice in here, a little goose egg in this section right here called Charlotte. Go to year number 2. So year two of the program, they increased it to $75 million. RU had $31 million worth of entitlement the second year. Charlotte picked up $25 million worth of entitlement. And then the rest of this was allocated based upon that economic development activity. But what the legislators told us is that, you know, we want a program for everybody. You commercial service airports need to provide the leadership and try to figure out how do we come up with this overall system program at the end of the day so we can have something that's equitable to everybody in terms of what that looks like. So, you probably asked the question, so what did the legislators actually allow to spend the money on? Fund improvements at the airport. What does that mean? Any project. Any project that we've got would be eligible under those funds. Now, I will tell you, we have such pent-up demand. We have significant high-priority type projects is where we've allocated those funds at the end of the day. I've got runways, I've got taxiways, I've got terminal, and all the other commercial service airports in the state have similar challenges, and so they're spending those dollars on high priority type projects. To put it in perspective, our budget back in 2019 for capital alone for a given year was about $120 million. The state produces about 17 million of that. So you can see the demand is far greater than even what our program is actually producing at the end of the day. The other thing we asked the legislators to do is I say, I need an emergency relief valve. And that emergency relief valve was a debt service provision. It says, hey, look, I can use it to pay existing debt service. But the legislators told us to say, look, we don't want you simply to pay debt service. We want to see progress. We do not want you simply to get dollars obligated. We want those dollars spent, and we want to see good high priority projects. That's what we want at the end of the day. But I told them, I said, this is a cyclical cycle. We have ups and downs in this industry. If you look over the past 60 years, and you can't predict these very well, we need a relief. And this was very powerful for relief because when COVID hit, we lost 96% of our customers. That is our primary revenue source at the end of the day. And if we did not have both the federal assistance and the state assistance, we would have defaulted on our bonds. That's a big deal. As of this point in time, most of the airports have now transitioned out of this debt service payment program, and they're getting back into key infrastructure projects. And so there's still this pent-up demand that we quite haven't reached at the end of the day. But I thought this is interesting. They provide us lots of flexibility, but also held us accountable for kind of the spend in terms of what we were doing. So what they asked NCDOT to actually do is say, hey, tell me about the state funding. What are the real needs out there at the end of the day? So they put together a program, and Bobby's kind of shared that, over $1 billion with infrastructure. What projects should be funded at the end of the day? And then they said, help them develop a formula. Develop a formula. I will tell you that formula was developed by 10 commercial service airports. All those airports got into the same room, and we hammered this thing out. And at the end of the day, what we did is we came up with something that we could all agree with, and we walked back to the legislators and we said, we all agree on the allocation formula. Pretty incredible. But it produced a great result that the legislators could stand behind and say, the entire system, general aviation, commercial, is behind this, and this is in the best interest for us. What does it look like? This is a little bit busy, so I'll try to do the best I can. So 10 commercial service airports, of that $75 million that's been allocated, the first allocation is based upon economic impact. So Bobby knows what the economic impact is. So for example, Charlotte's at about 46% of the total economic impact, RDU's about 27%, and so funds are allocated first by economic development. What we realized is that we needed to share some of that money with the smaller airports because some of the smaller commercial service airports would receive less than $1 million. And that was kind of our threshold, is that at a minimum, we wanted to make sure those airports got at least $1 million. In order to do that, we had to take a haircut. And we volunteered to take a haircut. So Charlotte took a 20% haircut. RDU took a 10% haircut. Greensboro took a 5% haircut. That money got picked up and redistributed back to those other 7 commercial service airports so we could prop them up a little bit to make sure there was equity there. Because again, you need to think about this. This is a system. So we need the system to work. If all the money goes to RDU, people just don't fly in the traffic pattern at RDU. They fly to our airports in North Carolina, they fly to your airports in Georgia. It's an overall system. We need to make investments for the overall system at the end of that. When it trickles down that additional pool, those 7 airports, the first 25% of that, it's just evenly distributed. So everybody gets the same amount. And then the remaining 75% of that is again based upon employments at the end of the day is how they kind of allocate those fundings. So this is kind of what that formula wound up looking like at the beginning of that first year. This was the first year, this 2020, was the first year that we actually had a formula-based distribution without an earmark type system at the end of the day. That was approved by the legislators, supported by the Division of Aviation, with the airports all in alignment of how the distribution should actually occur at the end of the day. With this, I'm going to pause, I'm going to turn it over to Bobby.
All right, thanks, Mike. The box on the left. Steve and I talked about this and said, you all would like to hear more about the programs. So I'm just going to be very high level, very brief, but talk about the Division of Aviation and the programs that the General Assembly has asked us to administer. So again, we've hit the commercial service, the approximately $75 million now recurring. The rest of this are airport grants, statewide program, and the GA Economic Development Fund. So under the airport grants, you can see basically we have a multi-year prioritization system that we use. It's somewhat similar to the Federal Aviation Administration on how they apportion out and decide on prioritizations of projects. A pretty large system, and so you've got to have some way to slice and prioritize projects. That system exists, and it was even defined and made even stronger through that statewide system plan where we developed system plan objectives. So think of it like 20 different categories of infrastructure. Those are prioritized, and from that, each one of them has an objective depending on what type airport you are. I'll talk a minute or two more about that in a second. Local match. That local match varied based on the classification of the proposed, the airport and the proposed work. And then lastly, Mike talked about earmarks, and that is still alive and well, like it is in most places. In the case of an earmark, if a project is elevated to that level of priority, that money to fund that earmark has at least historically come out of this program. Speaking of the program, it's averaging about $40 million now a year. So, just kind of make that point. I guess I want to back up secondary and say apportioned and directed. So again, it's apportioned out and directed of where the money is going to commercial service airports, and then it's the formula that helps develop how that's broken down. But the also apportioned and directed, you see, goes into airport grants. That's the prioritized by the General Assembly if there's any earmarks that's going to come out of that program. But we also have selection criteria that influences the other three, kind of sharing the airport grant one, as I mentioned. So that's in the case where some of that 40 is shared out if there is a legislative directed type project or program. So I mentioned the classification system. So as a part of our airport development plan, we have stratification in North Carolina. The yellow airports are commercial service, but the GA is broken down into 3 different categories. And it's red, blue, green. We probably debated over 2 meetings about how do you label and title these airports in these groups. And we landed on colors. But basically, the red airport, you want to think about it as a general aviation airport that has significant regional influence. And then the blue is sort of the sweet spot in here, but that's the business class airport. That's the 5,500-foot runway, full parallel taxiway, and ideally a full instrument approach. And then the green are the rural airports. So that's airports that are existing in the system, that's in a county, that's a still key component of transportation in that county, but we're somewhat in a maintain. I mean, we've got an asset there. The state, the federal government wants to see these airports continue to be taken care of, but they're not necessarily in any kind of major growth mode. So we have the classification, as I mentioned, there's system objectives to each of these different classification airports. This is in our airport development plan. And you can see some of the typical kind of category type projects are runway protection zones, which are a very important topic off the, it's basically the land and the control off the end of your runways. Runway condition, pavement condition, so that infrastructure health is very key, right? Everything in infrastructure has got to be maintained and rehabilitated often or occasionally. And so that's the pavement condition where we track that for the system of airports, but runway length, as we've heard about today, as well as lighting and some other things. So all of that, and then, it falls up under this program in terms of the things that we think about. Safety being number one, infrastructure health, and then some future development. So that's the airport grants. The second program is our statewide program. This is a program that we commit approximately $6 million a year to, a pretty strong program where we come alongside airports. And this is not just general aviation airports. We do work at some of typically the non-hub commercial service airports where we bring a contract that we administer and guarantee to contractors that this isn't just a payment crack seal job at this one small GA airport, but we're going to give you work at 10 airports. And so economies of scale, we get better pricing. So we do pavement maintenance. We have a statewide wildlife hazard mitigation and safety program that we help support even commercial airports in this. We have a pretty robust automated weather system across the state, and also handle the safety inspections that are required by FAA to help feed up updated information about the system. Nice little example here. This is once again circling back. This is where it all started, but this is the GA airport at Kitty Hawk, right behind the Wright Brothers Memorial. And you can see here, this is a typical project where we actually did some maintenance for a couple $100,000 with some seal coating and restriping, some crack sealing, basically sealing off that pavement. And so, compare a couple $100,000 to get another 5 to 7 years life out of this pavement, as opposed to going in there with a couple $1 million to rehab and replace all the pavement. Again, recognizing that that maintenance project is not the same as a rebuild, but it helps stretch the life and the time, as we all try to do with our own personal items such as our home and whatnot. So,
Bobby, I'm not a pilot, but you moved it from 2 to 3. I think that's about a 10-degree swing. The trees stayed the same. How'd you do that?
Senator, that's very astute of you. I was wondering if anybody was going to catch that. So, yeah, the runway doesn't move too much, but as we know, or maybe aviators know, the magnetic variation lines do shift as the Earth is rotating and tilted. So they tell me that that's what's going on, but it affects the actual magnetic compass. So if the alignment, is probably most of you in here know, that too represents a 20-degree on the azimuth, basically. So it's actually between 15 and 25-degree heading is what you're lined up at. So that one was probably around 25 degrees, but when the magnetic variation shifted a little bit to influence the magnetic compass to more like 26, then we have to change it to a 3, or in other words, 30 degrees. So it is kind of ironic and interesting that these do happen. What's also interesting about it is those lines move over about, I think it's a 20 or 25-year cycle, and then they start shifting back. So this will probably become a runway 2 at 220 eventually back to that. But we see, as you all do too, most runways are aligned northeast, southwest for our predominant winds. When you're having storms, they tend to be out of the northeast. In fair weather, they tend to be out of the southwest. So that's the classic alignment, is that 3-2-1 alignment.
I'm going to wait till the polarity changes on the Earth, because I think you're going to have to put your 3 on the other end then. They tell me that happens every few thousand years.
Yeah, so it feels like things flip upside down every now and then, doesn't it? So, so in a great example of one of our safety and statewide program, maintenance programs. And then the last is a really unique program that sort of came out, and again, stars aligning on whatever you want to say, back in 2016. FAA, our friends there, started really stepping up a little bit to push the revenue diversion topic, and said, hey, the taxes that are generated on an airport really should stay or reside on that airport. The backbone that they had would only push the topic so much on fuel tax. And so with that, North Carolina was generating, based on our structure, we were generating about $7 million annually on fuel tax. Commercial airlines are exempt, and so that bit of revenue was also redirected to us. Legislators decided to do something kind of creative with this. They said, we're going to take that relatively small pot of money, and we're going to say, we want you to target economic development in the state with that. And then a second bill followed along and said, we want it to go to GA airports. And so that's what they set this program up as. I have a lady now that manages this, and the focus and target on this is jobs. This money chases jobs at our general aviation airports. So you can see here we've processed or working with about $29 million since this program got stood up, and we're close to approaching 1,000 jobs now, averaging almost $65,000 in salaries. Because I don't have to tell you this group, but the jobs that we generate at airports, when it comes to tying into airspace, tend to be much higher than the average as far as what we see. So this has been a very successful program for us, and this depiction is not made necessarily to read, but let you know that we certainly have tried to stratify this and spread the love, so to speak.
You said it real fast, but you said commercial exempt.
Yes, sir.
Tell me a little bit more about that, if you would.
About the same time, at Charlotte Douglas was U.S. Airways hub. Now it's American. Legislators years ago had capped their fuel tax at $2.5 million annually. Best numbers that we could tell, they were paying in about $20 to $22 million a year in fuel tax because of the American hub there, and that's just American, not the other airlines. And so that cap was expiring. I believe it was December 31st of 2016. And so, obviously American was reminding everyone that this is going to sunset. And so there was a lot of discussions and conversations around that. And not only did it get reinstated, they exempted all commercial airlines in North Carolina of any fuel tax. So essentially, in that same bill, however, they laid the direction of that fuel tax, instead of going to the general fund like what it was doing, they laid the pipe and directed it to North Carolina DOT to go to the Division of Aviation for purposes like this. So that got aligned and corrected. I like to say they laid the pipe, but they just shut the flow back that was going through there, but they got the pipe laid correctly. And so, you know, we could go back and forth on that topic, but, you know, it keeps North Carolina competitive, the way they structured that. And again, you know, so what we're talking about, the fuel tax as being taxed, is really your corporate and GA, you know, primarily. And so that's where this money's going, is to GA. And so that's I think, very, very successful. And as I say, I'm thankful to have someone that wakes up every morning and is thinking about this and how they can help, you know, pull all the pieces together to make these projects successful. And I think it shouldn't go without saying that 25 million invested is 85 million total investment. So you've got other stakeholders at the table, obviously, county, state, whatever, you know, that's involved in this. So I think we have 2 more slides. Basically, you know, key to this is obviously in any kind of funding is accountability. And so, you know, wanted to just make this point before Mike talked about it. This legislative directed money, it has a lot of flexibility to it, and the purposes of it are broad in general. And as soon as they passed this, they did put in the bill that they wanted us to develop a clear understanding of what the needs are at the commercial airports, and also the formula that Mike talked about. And then just shortly thereafter, they wanted us to produce a second report on how the funds were being used. So we produced those things, and that formula, which I must say, and Mike was a true leader in that with the 10 airports, and I think it was his leadership that really pulled everyone together. But I will tell you, that was quite a scene to see these airports coming from all these different sizes and perspectives to work collaboratively like they did, and to agree, especially the large, to take those haircuts. And look at this system, look at the aviation system in North Carolina as a working, functioning system. You know, early on in the days when he arrived at RDU, he pulled the general aviation airports and his community together and said, look, I need you all to get ready. I need you all to be thinking about helping me out with getting the GA, getting these smaller aircraft out into the system, the reliever system. So RDU in Raleigh-Durham is growing, commercial service is increasing, more flights, and obviously you know what that's doing to my capacity, and building new runways these days are really challenging. So again, working that as a community, seeing that how each other helps each other out. So he's been a champion of that and continues to be. Another thing in the legislation was really important was time limit on encumbering those funds. So we're going to give you money, you need to get it encumbered, and then you need to get it expended. And so we're tracking that and reporting that information. And so we have a system that does that. Secondly, I talked about the state aid and economic development programs. Those are based on reimbursable grants. So you got to do the work, produce the documentation, follow the requirements, and then we reimburse you for that. And then in the budget that finally just passed, I think the last state in the union that got our state budget passed a few weeks ago, but they've added additional reporting requirements in there that we'll report out on these programs. So I'm excited about that, because as we were doing an annual report, it's just showing up the requirement in that. But and then lastly, some key takeaways. So Mike, I'm going to let you take some here.
Thank you. So just want to highlight for everybody again, airports are facing some pretty significant headwinds. Those headwinds are the funding that's necessary to build that critical infrastructure. Your airports are growing, your state is growing. Airports are a critical component to overall economic development, so making that investment is going to be important. I would just encourage you to have some sort of reoccurring funding program that they can kind of count on at the end of the day, because that way they can plan. All these airports have these long-term plans in place, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to fund the investments. If they don't have the funding for it, they're going to defer some investments that could drive jobs at the end of the day within the state. And of course, airport funding, if you didn't hear anything else from me, it needs to be viewed as an investment at the end of the day. It truly is an investment at the end of the day. And I'll be very clear that when we started to look at this program, all of the airports and part of that task force were very clear that we didn't want our program based upon an aviation fuel tax to the carriers. We felt that all the dollars were being generated already, they were already coming back to the state and to the local communities. There needed to be a reinvestment. And again, 23 to 1, it's a staggering. You can't go to any financial investor that you use and give them $1 and they're going to give you 23 back at the end of 12 months. It's very, very powerful. So we're going to encourage you to make an investment in your airport. It benefits not only your state, but also benefits us and other people across the country. I'm going to let Bobby finish the next two.
So essentially, I've touched on these, but the program, and they made it very, very clear to us, it needs to be streamlined. Especially these smaller G airports are, managing a lot of different priorities and wearing a lot of different hats. And so as streamlined as we could make these programs, that's what we tried to do, with obviously assuring the accountability piece of that is super important. And then finally, again, we said it once, we've said it many, many times, and have said it, it's a system, right? So we want to be fair and equitable in terms of how we distribute the funds, and that again, we're looking at airports for their needs and helping meet those needs with these funds. So that's the task that got placed back at us, and we're certainly trying to deliver on that. So I think that brings us to any questions or comments.
Committee members?
Yes, sir. Commissioner.
Thanks for the great presentation and tag teaming it, very, very insightful. Just a little bit, I may have missed it. When you had the original sort of table of implementation, walk me through why I guess things were sort of staged as revenues were generated through redirection and getting the pipeline oriented correctly. Was that why that was sort of, well, like I forget how many years it took, but obviously you took a staggered approach to get to where you ultimately wanted to be. And yeah, there you go. Well, yeah, one of those. Yeah. Does that help me understand? And I missed the incremental nature of the funding ramp up there.
Right. Yeah, and you talked to commercial, which is that dark green. I think it's pretty clear how that program pretty much was developed and the purposes to it. This light green is, again, the Aid to Airports program. This was our program previously, and it was pretty much, you could think of this program as our general aviation funding and our commercial service. As Mike touched on, this is the original sort of legacy program with commercial service. That has now pretty much weaned off to be replaced by this state AIP, or Airport Improvement Program. The green continues to be our state aid to airports, albeit not 100% tied to just GA airports, because we have other programs that are statewide that some commercial airports can benefit from, with lighter, lower staff, economies of scale of funding. So our statewide program, we do help support some of the commercial service airports in those programs. Relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but very, very beneficial and helpful to them. So this light green is what's funding those three boxes, and I think, Commissioner, you wanted to go to the slide with the three boxes. We touched on the growth, but you can see the growth. A very, very key point in this is that as this moved forward and advanced to get complete total buy-in from the system, obviously commercial service airports are benefiting, but clearly GA airports and this state aid program benefited with a 75% increase basically over 3 years. So it shored up that program as well, seeing that the water rise for the system. And so I'm not sure, Commissioner, if that answers your question, or you want to know a little bit more about those programs.
No, that's very helpful. And that's, again, I was just sort of looking at how you ultimately now achieve the sort of plateau it looks like, obviously with revenue impacts, but you certainly achieved a great thing. And I would point to this joint committee that the bottom left corner is a little better than where we are right now from a state funded portion, so it'll give you some perspective of how far they've come. One other comment I'll just say I thought was very novel, and as you talked about it, was the categorizing your airports into different colors based on their prioritization, and that's very similar to just how we address our highways around Georgia. We've got them broken into 4 categories: critical, high, medium, low, and we allocate dollars based on what category they're in. So there's a repeatable, consistent prioritization process that we work through to make strategic investments, and so that's really a great idea. I like that a lot.
And that's what this small little footnote down here for the light green is covering, the grant statewide programs and then that economic development. So those taxes, everything are inside here, kind of represented so we didn't get more detailed on what this is. And if you could carry this to the left, this would basically be a flat line going back years. So again, I think similar to sort of where you all are at today.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah,
You're way more important than I am, Mr. Chairman.
No, go ahead.
Is there some, and I thank you for it, this is very insightful, and you're very kind to come and present this to us, but is there some concern that the appropriation model that you used, and I like how everybody came in the room and you know, came out and everyone lived through it and came up with a model and got on the same page, but it seems like it inherently maintains a status quo, such that Greenville and Concord it's not the economic impact of specific projects, it's basically of where the airport is now, basically their budget. And so the appropriation is based on that. They'll always get that same basic level of funding off of the appropriation, so that it doesn't seem to account for, like in Raleigh, you've got more flights, your budget's going to grow, but it looks like the model might, and I know you got to put a peg down somewhere and have a status somewhere, but it looks like it could hinder perhaps the growth of some of the regional airports, perhaps. Certainly, probably never to the size that Charlotte has, but was there any concerns about that? And secondly, along that same vein, I noticed in one of those years that two of the airports didn't receive any funding, and how did you talk them into that?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and do that. So, regarding the formula at the end of the day, I think it is something that we all felt would satisfy for some period of time. We may have to revisit this, but I will tell you, this is what I call version 1.0. We're already starting to develop a version 2.0.
Okay.
It's a little bit different program.
Okay.
It really looks at probably you're probably highlighting there's some key significant infrastructure projects. We've got a runway, $375 million. Charlotte's got a runway, $400 million. Asheville's got a terminal, $200 million. There are these key signature projects that we think could have a version 2.0. We're starting to have some conversations with our legislators. So I think this will evolve over time. And to kind of answer your question, the other gentleman's question is that how did it kind of move from 40 to 70? I'll be quite honest. When we talked to legislators the first time, they said, how much do you think you're going to wind up needing? We were starting at $6 million. We were concerned if we went from $6 million to about $40 million. Yes. And then we went immediately to 75. What happened in this zone right in through here is this was during COVID. And of course, the federal government gave out just a ton of money. I think there was 3 airports out there that they were smaller airports, and the way the formula worked, they got a tremendous amount. I think they got 5 or 6 times their annual operating revenue. I think my equivalent was something in the neighborhood of about 15 to 18% of what my operating income was. So at that point in time, the legislators made the decision that says, hey, because those airports have done so well by getting federal funding, we're going to shave that for this year, for this one-time event, because of the funding that actually they got. And then the next year, we'll go right back to where we were before. That was the decision made by the elected officials, that they felt that these other airports were getting more than their fair share from the federal CARES Act, CARISA Act, ARPA. I mean, just 3 different rounds of funding that came into the system.
Can I have a follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Remember, true, false, or me.
Okay. Is it not true that as opposed to the general aviation, so the general aviation, the $7 million that comes from the aviation fuel,
Yes.
that goes to the general aviation airports, smaller amounts. I noticed that the model is not one of dispersing monies until the project is a reimbursement model. So you do it, and then, but some smaller airports, I would think that would be a fairly difficult maneuver, cash flow wise, in coming up with $750,000 for these T-hangers or for fuels, whatever it is. I've got to come up with money first before you give me the money back. Did you run into that? I could see that being a problem.
Yes. I feel like you looked at my phone. I'm dealing with one of those literally right now in an Eastern Coast airport that is that precise thing. We've come alongside with them with $400,000 out of this program. And, you know, with the stakeholders involved in this, it's an upfit, hanger upfit, that, you know, he's saying we're really challenged. Economic development projects don't work this way. We need this money. So that, I think, is going to be addressed in 2.0. But we plug it in just like our traditional state grant projects, you know, where the community has to fund something and then be reimbursed. But that doesn't work as well with economic development, I think, to your point. So it has popped up some. I mean, basically, communities have had to step up. We do everything we can to pretty much reimburse that the day they pay it, kind of thing. Through electronic means, we've got that pretty down. But at the end, you know, they have to have that money in order to make that happen. So it is a little bit of a challenge. It's a great point. So I think that's something we're looking to address, and that's.
Some of the banks have a problem with that type of float, though.
Oh, yeah. But that's where the, you know, award letter commitment from the state helps in that case. Thank you.
I have more of a just practical question, and you may have said it and I missed it. There's a lot of information, but this is something I think that we all really needed to hear. But when you look at what was the, or how did you convince the legislature to, over the period of 5 years, in new dollars, these aren't self-generated dollars, is what I can gather, for $115 million? I mean, it's all well and good to say it's economic development, but from what I've seen in the legislature, it takes more than that. So what was that? Did the governor buy into it and say, this is something I want to do? Can you legislate? How did you do that?
I can answer that, but based on my role, I think he's got the better inside track.
Yeah. I will tell you, we had two champions. We had a champion in the Senate and we had a champion in the House. Both were chairs of transportation, and they got it. And they got this idea, this principle, which is we're generating a lot of taxes and a lot of revenue for the state, and we're going to take some of those dollars and we're going to reinvest those dollars because there's a return on investment. They bought into that. They believe in that. And you can see not only did they buy into this program, but they're also putting even more money into the program, another $115 million this year. They see value in this investment into that. But we could give you some points of contact with some elected officials in North Carolina if you wanted to reach out and have a conversation with them as well.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, appreciate y'all's presentation.
Just ask a question. Are you allowed to carry on funding from one fiscal year to another? Are you allowed to roll that money over?
Yes, for sure. There is most definitely a lag. You know, we oftentimes find ourselves spending last year's money just because once we finally know what it is that we get and can get that awarded to local government, you know, it's just, there's that lag there.
Thank y'all very much. Okay, I believe next up on our list is Danny Morgan with Dalton Airport.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Unlike the last presentation on the full state, I want to only speak about Dalton, a small community airport up in the northwest corner of Georgia. My name is Danny Morgan. I serve as chairman of the Airport Authority, a volunteer position, although appointed by the mayor and council. I've been serving in that position for about 10 years, so I've learned a little bit each and every year. Someone mentioned a large tongue or a tongue and a big brain. I've got a tongue and a very small brain like this, so I'm here with them as we can work through it. I served as president in my professional career as a perpetual machine company and vice president of Textile Rubber and Chemical Company. We're a local company, a family-owned, 70-year-old company in Dalton, Georgia, and we employ about 500 employees there. We'll go through a few slides. This first one here, you've seen a lot of this information before. This comes from the state GDOT program that was generated for 2019 and published in 2020. As you've heard, what, $1 and $23 comes out of North Carolina. What we found from this report is $1 goes in, $88 comes out through the economic impact. I don't know what happened to that screen there, but Dalton is generating $7.8 million. You'll see here from the economy from this particular report as well. A couple of photographs of our airport out on the ramp that shows some of the air traffic that comes in there. We have a 5,500-foot runway, 100 feet wide. We're one of those that was mentioned earlier, one of the larger type. We have ground-based equipment as well as satellite approaches. We have a city-run FBO. We did have up until 2008 a for-profit FBO, and we found that as economies got tougher to operate, we just couldn't function with a for-profit. So we went to the city. The city took over the airport and all the fuel cells. All employees now are city employees. We own 8 hangar buildings, the city does. We're home to 43 aircraft, as you see there, 7.8 million annual economic impact. And we have a $300,000 tax digest. That is a low tax digest of the aircraft that are based there as compared to what it used to be with the carpet industry, and I'll speak more about that in just a few moments. We have average of $550,000 over the last 10 years of monies that have come in through the federal grant program administered by GDOT for airport improvement projects. And all of the improvement projects were primarily safety-related projects. You've seen this number before. This is how the federal program, federal monies are provided. 90% is federal, 5% state, 5% local. One of the things since I've been involved, we have never had an issue with the city of Dalton providing its 5% match to any program that we were eligible for or received from the federal or from the state. The state, as you'll see, is 75% programs and 25% local. And again, as I mentioned, we've never had an issue getting the mayor and council to support whatever monies were necessary to fulfill those obligations. As mentioned earlier, and you may know, $150,000 is allocated to each of the airports that have a CIP index of $6 million for 5 years, for each year. And so we always make sure that we've got that many projects that we want to do, and we always get approval from the mayor and council that we would spend. If we received all the dollars, we would spend the dollars to do the match. You see there, we received in the last 10-year period, we received from 2009 to 2019, $5.1 million in federal monies. The state provided $216,000, and of course local was $262,000. All of these were primarily safety-related projects, which were primarily trees up in the approach area, and then we had one ramp project that was done, as you can see where the helicopter markings are. That's a new ramp area. That was the only pavement project that I remember us having in this time frame. Some of our problems that we have at the Dalton Airport, as we would probably share with every other general aviation airport in the state, is our operating expenses are more than what our revenue is. We have two sources of revenue we can get. That would be fuel sales or hangar rental. Hangar rental would also would include ground leases. These areas continue to give us a problem, and our costs go up each and every year. And but our sales of our fuel sales are somewhat stagnant from time to time, but also hangars is always a big issue. The Welcome Center is our terminal here. It was built in 1986. Funding for our airport, we are not eligible, as each of you know, for federal funding or state funding for terminals or hangars. We are over the 55% 2,000 population number. And so we're not eligible, so we have to use local funds to pay and build all of this. We have 39 individuals on a waiting list for hangars right now. That's 39 individuals with 39 aircraft.
Can I ask you a question about those hangars? Because I see what happens, and I'm sure we've got here, the Jackson County airports, and don't know, not be any different. A guy will say, hey, I gotta park my plane somewhere, I'll go to Jackson County, I'll go to Franklin County, I'll go to Athens, and he'll be on 3 different lists, same airplane, but he's on multiple lists. What do you do to prevent that? And I've heard some different ideas, but I'm afraid that's a syndrome that happens all over the country.
It does happen, and it happens with us as well. But what we try to do is determine where is that aircraft currently, where is it based, and why do they want to come to the Dalton airport? And most of the time, it's because they live in the general community, or they're working out of that particular area. And also, they like the services that may be provided there. But it's very common for someone to have be on the list in Dalton, but also be in Calhoun, or perhaps Cleveland, Tennessee, or Chattanooga, Tennessee. And often they want to relocate because of the services or the cost to relocate. Tax digest is another big issue. And look at the cheaper tax digest. Several years ago, we had an aircraft move from Florida to Dalton because of the tax reasons. So those are issues that we have to look at. But we understand Calhoun is full, Cleveland is full, so many of the airports there's not any hangars.
Charge a fee to be on a hangar waiting list?
No, sir, we do not currently now. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but we don't charge a fee for that. But our hangar list is typically updated every month. And so those are active numbers. And recently we've seen it grow to the 39 from just in the high 20s. Dalton is probably best known as being the carpet capital of the world. It's probably what you've heard about. Industry, we did a report recently for some other industries, but as you'll see there, 2011 to 21, there was $1.25 billion invested in the Dalton community. And when I say Dalton, I'm referring to about a 50-mile radius of the Dalton airport. And this is not government money, this is private money that's come in for expansion or building of new facilities, manufacturing facilities. It's been 3,790, almost 3,800 jobs created. We have about 30 international companies. The residential and commercial floor covering, as I mentioned, is the largest. For 2019 numbers, that's $24 billion at the middle level of carpet produced that had within a 50-mile radius. 24 billion. 20 is going to be about 23.5 billion. First quarter of 2020, COVID hit. That's when the sales went down, but then they picked back up. But the diversity of the carpet is different. The commercial carpet sales, which is the higher profit margin products, is less because of multifamily buildings going down, as well as commercial buildings not spending as much. Residential carpets or floor coverings have really picked up. Large number of tax revenue is generated in that particular area. We just recently had a solar panel manufacturer relocate there and build a facility. We have automotive component manufacturers for both Mercedes, BMW, Toyota, and Nissan. All of those particular industries have satellite facilities there in Dalton. A new one on the block is the synthetic turf manufacturing. That's about $3 billion in 2020 dollars. And that area segment is growing about 17 to 20% per year. That's why all synthetic turf companies now are owned by private equity. They come in and purchase every one of them. And after 2 or 3 years, they sell them to another private equity company. One of the things that our organization does, we supply the equipment that makes this carpet that you're walking on today. We build that in Dalton. We also build all the equipment for the synthetic turf manufacturing. We supply about 95% of that around the world. Our chemical side of the business supplies about 60 to 70% of the chemistry that goes on the back of this carpet or the back of turf. So for those that were either in attendance at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday to watch the Dogs play, or watched on television, or the Falcons played on Sunday, they were playing on syndicated turf. That turf was built in Dalton, produced in Dalton on our equipment, and has our chemistry on the back of it. This is just a brochure, or not a brochure, but a slide of some of our equipment in a turf facility. And we have a flight department. We have 3 corporate aircraft based in Dalton. We own our own facilities, our own hangars. We have 3 hangars there. We're in the process of building a 4th, and we're in the process of acquiring an additional corporate aircraft. We consume in our company about 1/3 of all the fuel that's pumped through the Dalton Airport. And we only burn jet fuel, no avgas. As you've seen before, through some of the information that I looked at in video from previous presentations, Florida is one of the benchmarks that we all aspire to be. $329 million in their aid program. Georgia, $16 million. We've got a shortfall. We've all talked about that. We won't dwell on that. We'll move over. So we're going to come up with a couple of recommendations for us to consider. For us, we would like to see $100 million in funding coming from the state. The question is where did that come from? But that's something that I think that we certainly need to aspire and work toward. Secondly, this is one that we've talked about a lot in our airport authority meetings. The ad valorem tax on the property, on the aircraft that are based at various airports. As I mentioned earlier, we have about $300,000 in tax. Why could that not be earmarked back to the airport for use for infrastructure or other airport programs, in addition to monies that they would receive from the federal program? As I mentioned earlier, hangars are a problem. We don't have enough of them. If we had 39, it appears that we could fill them. And if we started that trend, I think we could even put more aircraft on the field. Everyone wants to put them in the hangar. If we had that $300,000 back, we could fund our own hangars.
School children gotta go to school. And just wanna make sure we got lots of demands that as legislators, we gotta figure that one out.
That's why you have the job. Number 3, increase, perhaps an opportunity to increase the funding for state funds, where it's now from 75%. Why not raise that opportunity up where we can take state funds and airports could receive something a little more for that, say a 90% match for the paving projects, or 80% for terminal or non-safety items, if there is state funding there. You know, currently, as I mentioned earlier, Dalton, we've not had an issue of matching funds. A lot of small airports very well may have issues where they could maybe come up with 10%, but to come up with 25% could be a very difficult task. We're very fortunate that we've got the tax base and the manufacturing opportunities there to provide that. The challenge is to convince the mayor and council to spend the monies. And then also hangar funding. Currently, you know, hangars are not funded by state or federal programs. All monies have to go toward the safety-related projects, and we've been working on safety-related projects at Dalton for 20 years. And I think we'll always have some of those safety-related projects. But once we get those completed, then we may have opportunities to receive some federal and state monies to support hangars. But I think that's something that we need to really consider now, because that's one opportunity for generation of revenue for our airport. We are a break-even airport. We really don't make any money because we only have, as I mentioned earlier, those 2 sources of income, fuel and hangar rental. And if we're not building hangars, we're not investing into our future. And so that's something we've been pushing for our local body to invest. And hopefully, we've tried to sponsor. We've been working on this very hard for 10 years, and just hasn't proved anything. I think the state came up and said, we'll support painters by some percentage. I think we can get our local government to agree to that. Because we're real close there now. It's just, we need something to push it across the end. And that's the sum of all four of the recommendations that we've come before you today. We'll offer our thanks for allowing us to come and present and to be here. We're happy to answer any questions whenever.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Appreciate it. Greg Kelly, Mr. Belto Tax. Hilton Head. Savannah.
Hey, Steve. Here's some hard copies if anybody's interested in that. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to present you this morning. It was prepared in coordination and cooperation with the commercial airports in the state of Georgia, excluding Hartsville. They can speak for themselves. But working with Valdosta, Albany, Columbus, Brunswick, and Augusta, we put together our ideas, which made up this presentation this morning. And again, with some additional input from some general aviation airports as well. So, Senate Bill 84, which created this committee, is a huge deal. I've been doing airport management in the state of Georgia for over 32 years, and I've been active on the state level in the state of Georgia on aviation for all those 32 years. This is the biggest achievement that I can think of, and the biggest opportunity that I can think of in those 32 years we've seen come out of the state. To have the state legislature do a deep dive and look at the needs of Georgia's airports. Georgia DOT has historically done a great job at making sure that our needs were known, but this is the first time that the legislature is going to take a formal look, and is taking a formal look at the needs of airports. And to us, it's a huge deal. There's been some achievements over the years, but nothing this big. As we all know, Georgia likes to tout that we're a top state for business and have been for the past 7 years. And airports help make that happen. If you look at the list of criteria for what goes into making the selections, transportation is number 2 on the list of 13 items. And airports are part of that. So in order to keep this going, we need to keep airports funded in a way that we can continue to contribute to Georgia being number 1 for business. I was reviewing the latest issue of James Magazine, came across this article. Since we were going to be in Jackson County, I decided to cut it out. We talked about it earlier. John Scott mentioned the battery power plant coming in. This article refers to that 6,000 workers. John, I'm not sure how big a role the airport played here, but I'm sure it was a consideration that the company made in deciding to locate here. And so airports do attract business, as we talked about. I'll get right into the economic impact and the funding disparity. This again, the data I'm showing this morning is excluding Hartsfield-Jackson. Hartsfield-Jackson would distort this way beyond reality in terms of what we need to look at today. That deserves its own look. So these numbers are excluding Hartsfield-Jackson. Commercial airports, excluding Atlanta, contribute, as far as economic impact, $5 billion to the state of Georgia. For return, the state allocates $2 million on average per year to commercial airports. General aviation, aggregate $2 billion economic impact, $14.5 million of funding. We need to do better than this. Georgia's airports are in competition. We compete with other airports outside of the state. Valdosta competes with Jacksonville and Tallahassee. Brunswick competes with Jacksonville. Savannah competes with Charleston, Hilton Head, and Jacksonville. And Augusta competes with Columbia. And Columbus reminded me they are competing with Montgomery, Alabama as well. And you can see here, we're competing with states that fund their airports at a much higher level than us. South Carolina looks similar, but if you include all of the aid that they give the airports in terms of recruiting air service that comes from other sources, the tourism division and the economic development division, they do fund at a much higher level. They're funding in other manners for the commercial airports to draw air service, which frees up other dollars for those commercial airports to grow. We are in competition. It's a business. Remember that. And the general aviation airports have the same challenge as well. We're not the only state that's looking at funding for our airports. North Carolina, we've heard from, and by the way, Mike and Bobby, I really appreciate you coming down here to share with us what you have achieved up there and create the roadmap for a lot of states. South Carolina, we know for a fact their legislative efforts underway there. Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky is starting that. So we're not alone. North Carolina took the lead. Other states are actively pursuing similar type funding sources. Let's look at investment versus tax revenue generated. And the source here is Georgia GDOT's economic impact study of 2019. General aviation airports funding level again is 14 to 14.5 million, and they generate $81 million in revenues from the state and local. Commercial airports, again excluding Atlanta, receive 2.5 million on average, but generate over $201 million in taxes, state and local taxes, for a total of 16.5 at 282 contributions to the tax base. And again, the disparity is glaring here. These are taxes. If you look at the GDOT study, economic impact study, it defines the taxes. So they're not just throwing a general number out there. There's a lot of detail in the report that shows exactly where they derive the taxes. And I'm sure they left some off the table. They were being very conservative from what I read and from the people I talked to that prepared the report. So this is just the main taxes that they looked at when they were calculating those numbers. In the funding gap, we looked at funding gaps earlier. These are the commercial airports in the state. Airports are required to have a 5-year airport capital improvement program that is submitted to the FAA and to the state. Brunswick and St. Simons Island, their capital plan over 5 years is $39.5 million. The funding they are going to get from the AIP Airport Improvement Program from the FAA, the Passenger Facility Charge, which is a program approved by the FAA for commercial airports to collect dollars off people that buy an airplane ticket. And then, in addition, for the next 5 years, the infrastructure allocation, which basically equates to the equivalent of one extra share of entitlement dollars per year. So basically, 40% of this number, 30–40% of that number is added dollars from the infrastructure package, which again has a life cycle of 5 years. So without that, those numbers would be much lower. But these numbers are pretty glaring. These are the 5-year needs. That's how much the feds are going to give us, and there's the gap. So we looked at gaps earlier, but it's important that you can see those numbers are significant. So how do we close that gap? And that's what we're here to talk about today. I did want to bring up air cargo because air cargo is something that is growing in our state, and it's something that we need to take seriously and invest in. We have a lot of opportunity in this state to grow air cargo. The potential is significant, but we do need to invest. Atlanta, they are again on their own, but they're a major air cargo hub, major international air cargo hub, who can deliver products 72 hours anywhere in the world through their hub. They do have capacity constraints though. So where does that capacity go? We want it to stay in the state of Georgia. So the other airports need to step up and create capacity for air cargo as well. Savannah, huge port complex, we're investing $60 million into a new air cargo complex, which will be a game changer for our region, significant game changer. Huge impact once that's complete 2 years from now. We're already pouring concrete. Albany, as we know, has a UPS hub down there, and that's continuing to grow. Significant growth. It's a UPS regional hub. A lot of opportunity there. Augusta, Brunswick, Valdosta, Columbus, they have some air cargo, but they have land, and there's a lot of opportunity for air cargo growth if the funding presents itself. And then general aviation, e-commerce, and their commitments to same-day delivery. I think it's natural to expect that each general aviation airport in the state of Georgia would be a candidate for some type of air cargo operation. So this is something I think we really need to include in our findings with this committee report. So we prepared what we think should be some funding program objectives. We think, again, between $180 and $100 million is what the target is for that. How do we arrive at that? Again, if you look at the 5-year need, it's over $400 million. So this would get us there. But the other thing we looked at is, what do we reasonably spend? What can we spend? Can we really spend all that at once? So we worked with the state and the other airports and figured if we targeted this amount, we could probably crank that out and produce good projects for the state of Georgia that return dollars to the state in terms of economic activity. But this is an outline here. Again, we envision, like North Carolina, maybe two programs or two sides of a program, one for general aviation airports and one for commercial airports, which would allow, we think, ultimately more money to flow into general aviation airports if we follow the same type of model that North Carolina has. And you can see the different components of the program that we think should be included. If you have a copy in front of you, I'm not going to read each one, but there are distinctions between each program based on what we think. Some of these things we've heard before this morning. By the way, before I forget, I wanted to commend the Georgia Airports Association and Ed Lindsay and Mike Vacker for the great job they did working on House Bill 84 to get us to this point where we're at today. And President Robert Burr, past President Leonard Robinson, and previous President Tom Strong, and Board Member Jim Galloway did a great job in showing leadership and helping us get to this point. So we appreciate that, gentlemen.
Just make sure you understand it's Senate Bill 84.
Senate Bill 84.
Yeah, don't give those House guys any credit.
But it is a co-chair. It is a co-chair, right? Anyhow, one of the things that I think you heard from the North Carolina report, we need to make sure the attributes conform to the IDIs of whatever program we put together: reliability, predictability, flexibility, spendability, and affordability. Those are key attributes for the program that would make this program work for airports. And then these are some recommendations for the committee report. Again, some of these may not be achievable by the end of the year, which is what I understand the report, the committee is required to have a report completed by, is that correct, Mr. Chairman, by the end of the year. So I think it's really important that the report leave the door open for further study and review to ensure we have a solid program going forward. I think it's going to take a little more time than just about the end of the year to accomplish and create a program. But if you look at these, again, we talked about predictability, a multi-year program at the top, justifications, defining how much, GA versus commercial budget, funding mechanisms for GA versus commercial, CPI adjustments are important. That's not necessarily included in the federal programs, but it always hurts airports when the dollars aren't adjusted for CPI over year. And then a multi-year rollover and discretionary element part of the program. Reduce and or eliminate the local match, which we talked about earlier. Improve funding priorities for revenue-producing projects like hangars, like fuel farms, and things like that for our general aviation airports. Allow for land acquisition funding. Land acquisition is critical to our airports to continue to allow for opportunity for growth. A streamlined process that was mentioned before. The federal process is very cumbersome. Sometimes the state process can be very cumbersome for the smaller airports. We need to look at that. That's important. Small airports have small governance structures. The complexity of the current process can be a little overwhelming. More local discretion in how projects, or which projects can be considered. Conform to the committees, which we talked before. And then I think the report really needs to call for additional work on this if we can't accomplish it by the end of the year. I think that's critical to the success of this program. Spend the time on it that needs to be spent on it and make sure it's a really good, solid program to get this done right. Food for thought, I'm the last person in the room that would suggest raising taxes, but I did want to point out that the state of Georgia is one of the few states in the country that does not have an excise tax on rental cars. And there's an awful lot of rental car activity in the state of Georgia and an awful lot of rental car activity at Georgia's airports. Savannah alone, revenues, gross revenues on rental cars are about $55 million a year. That's just Savannah. By the way, Hilton Head's in our name because about 50% of the bed is Hilton. So we got that traffic. The other thing you may be aware of or may not be aware of, but rideshare tax is currently at 50 cents per trip, regardless of the length. So you could have a $300 trip, it's 50 cents. And that money is dedicated per Georgia code to transit projects only. So there may be some opportunity there. But right now, I think that's only bringing in about $9 million. So again, I'm not advocating for any increases, but this is something to look at as the committee goes forward. And then the hotel tax is dedicated to transportation, but we don't get any in the airport side. At $5 per room night across the state, bringing in about $180 million. And again, by code, the money is supposed to go to transportation, although airports are left out of the mix. So, one thing we want the committee and the members of this room to always remember, when you're talking about allocating dollars, and I know Commissioner McMurray's in the room, they may not want to hear this, but I think it's support of airports, but investing in a mile of road gets you 1 mile down the road. Investing in a mile of runway gets you anywhere in the world. And that's true. So with that, I appreciate the time and opportunity. If there are any questions or comments, please let me know.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you. And I would like to talk to you about the interchange project. This is how we get it.
Now you want to talk about roads?
Everybody's turning this camera on both ends. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Said they, we got one of our own up here. Said the, Bird, I think you're up.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. I'm Robert Burr. I'm the immediate past president of the Georgia Airport Association. And as Greg mentioned, we have many of our members in the room, presidents and members. And we're glad they're here. And we've been polling our membership as far as this committee goes. We've been following exactly what's happening and watching the videos. And I have actually two presentations. One's a summary of what the Georgia Airport Association is going to recommend to the study group. But prior to that, we've asked North Carolina, and another thank you to North Carolina for coming down here, but also we're comparing our program to our adjacent state, Florida. Unfortunately, they could not attend this meeting today, but they did give a presentation. I met with staff from Florida just recently to go over their presentation. I'm not going to go in detail about it. I can probably answer a lot of questions if there are. I want to highlight a few items that's in their program that might be very much interesting to the panel. Like any state, Florida wants to boast the aviation. It's one of the major states in the United States as far as aviation goes. I think these numbers are very knowledgeable to the group as far as how many airports they have. And they have a great mix of airports. As Carol Comer mentioned, and she gave a good presentation, and a fantastic presentation at our first hearing, is that we're very similar to Florida as far as the number of airports go. So we're talking about G airports. They have a lot more large hub airports, but as far as the total number of activities, we are basically very similar. You see some of the map type of airports. They want a little bit of overview of the Florida statute where they implemented the programs I'm going to talk about. The eligible program is very similar to the Georgia program, North Carolina program. A little bit about the Florida statute as far as their state transportation trust fund. And that's where the money comes for their programs, state transportation trust fund. One key component of that trust fund by legislation is that a minimum of 15% of the money in the trust fund has to go to sectors that are not roads and bridges. So we're talking about continuing program, they have that. The trust fund is replenished every year by activity in the state, by fuel tax, by different sectors, and the revenues have to be distributed by 15% to all sectors, and aviation is one of those sectors. So they have that continuing program that we are looking forward to. They have a very robust state program that Steve administers here. This trust fund, the aviation industry contributes $25 to $30 million per year. That's the aviation contribution into the trust fund. What do they get out of the trust fund? You saw some of the numbers. They have two different programs. One is $171 million, and they have a supplemental program that I'll talk about in a few minutes. That's very interesting, I think, to this group. There's a slide representing the same information. Of the total trust fund of $4.1 billion, 15% goes to these type of sectors. Aviation is one of them. 85% goes to the highway program. They have this eligibility for projects. Florida is not a block grant state. North Carolina is, Georgia is, so Florida has a little bit difference. Florida has most GA airports report directly to the federal government for funding in their program, the AIP program. Their emphasis is programs that are not eligible for those projects. They do contribute a portion towards the local contribution, but the state program actually has a lot more eligible projects based on needs for that airport that AIP does not fund or cannot fund, specifically revenue generation type projects. And of course, all projects have to be approved. Where by statutory funding, they have, again, it's a statutory law that commercial surface airports are funded 50-50 in the program. So if the federal government is giving 90% of the project, then the state will contribute 50% of the local share for commercial surface airports. For GA airports, it's even higher, 80%. So if the GA airports gets a federal fund project, the GA airport from the state project, you get 80% of the local share, giving only 20%, basically 2% of the total project to the GA project. Land acquisition is also an eligible project under the state program. There's a lot of needs in the state of Georgia for land acquisition, for safety-related issues and economic development, and they have a different funding formula for that type of project. This highlights their program. They know they're going to get the funding over the next 5 years. This is their capital equipment program for the fiscal year 22 to 26, where the money is allocated to two separate pots of money. I mentioned $172 million towards the project for the airports, but they have a second program called SIS, Strategic Initiatives System. Certain airports that have been identified within the state that have strong economic impact. All commercial airports are in that system, are eligible to fund, and general aviation are, if they've been identified to have programs that help strategic initiative for intermodal transportation. So they recognize airports are not an end of transportation facility. You interact with the roads, you interact with seaports and the rails. So there's a separate funding formula based on those airports that interact with the entire intermodal system. And certain airports in their system are eligible for funding under that pot of money. That's a brief overview of the Florida system. Before I go into my quick summary, does anybody have any questions about the Florida system? No? Okay.
Thank you.
I'll go to the second part of the presentation. Again, I'm representing the Georgia Airport Association. We've heard a lot of information over these 4 hearings, great information. I think the need's been clearly identified, the benefit has been clearly identified. It's basically an investment into the airport system. And with that, where do we go from here? What are our recommendations? A lot of these recommendations you already heard. I would just like to quickly summarize what we believe should be in the final report, action by regulation or legislation or further study that we need to go forward with the state of Georgia. The program we believe reasonably should be $80 to $100 million. We've been kicking around that number quite a bit about what's really justified. You heard from Carol that clearly we have a deficit of $400 million. What's reasonably to accommodate, what's comparable to other facilities, what can we handle? We think $80, $100 million of investment money would be appropriate to be a continuous state program. When you're looking for a program to be continuous, with basically, as we all know, the inflation animal is around, and the CIP considerations should be within that program. Currently, program dollars cannot carry over. Is that right, Steve? And that makes the program more fluid, and it enables specific projects, larger projects to be funded over accumulation of funds, thereby giving more flexibility to a program and efficient program. The type of eligible projects that are not currently funded or revenue producing, which actually brings more money back into the system. So you see those projects over long term pay back into the system. Land acquisition, that's very important for safety projects and other development projects. You all heard about the need for hangar development, and obstruction mitigation is a very high priority, not only in the local system, but actually the federal government is looking very strongly at obstruction mitigation, and is actually compromising some of our airports today. The percentage of proportion of state programs should be similar to the federal government. The federal government justified general aviation airports at 95%. Their rationale is very clear. They're all safety projects. The same rationale applies to the state program. We talked about carryover funding for larger projects, and also the process itself. We're always looking for less regulation, if you would, to be more streamlined, local decision making. Most airport managers know what's needed for the airport and what's best to put those funds dollars. The money will stay on the airport. It's not an issue of diversion. The issue is how the money should be best distributed on the airport. Another point that we have brought up is that there's an education committee having to do with workforce development. Almost everyone around is looking for, there's a job, what I see around the community is that help wanted signs are getting bigger. And it's definitely in the aviation sector. The airlines, I'm dealing with the airlines myself as far as they actually let too many people go during the COVID, expecting a 4 to 5 year return. They're getting a 5 year, actually we're getting in Brunswick a return numbers higher than 2019, but they don't have the capacity to serve the customer base. When you let a senior pilot leave, that's pretty instantaneously. To bring somebody in, it's at least a 2 to 3 year process. The education of the workforce development in the state of Georgia, we think should be carried over with the education committee. And also, further studies, I think we have not concluded that the air carrier component of this and the air cargo component, I think needs really more further studies. So we don't want to close the door with the study. We basically think we should open the door for another look at how the air carrier interacts. There's a lot of parallels between the Florida system, the North Carolina system that I think we could learn from and bring into our system to make it bigger and better. These are the main recommendations as represented by the Georgia Airport Association. With that,
You did pretty good batting both sides, Florida and Georgia.
well, as Mike said, someone asked, why would North Carolina come and offer some information to us? Why would Florida give us information? One airport's only good for one location. We recognize if one airport benefits, my airport will benefit flying to the airport and destination. So they recognize the same thing. So we're all in this system together. We're all in government service. We're looking for all the help for the government.
Thank you much, Mr. Burke. Are there any questions? Mr. Perkins?
Let's say that you waved the magic wand and $80 million bucks appeared for airports.
Correct.
Then the real fight begins. Who locks the people in the room like they did in North Carolina to see, do you have a plan for funding, model for the funds that will come up, like similar to what they came up with?
The $80 to $100 million was just got to pull out of the air. That was basically looking at what our capital development needs
Well,
are.
this is a magic wand, this is a wish
Right.
anyway.
So I'll say the dollar number. And it basically follows very similar to the type of program we have already. Now, the major changes is the shift of a percentage. So looking at the numbers of the projects in there, we think that those projects have already been identified to be adequately funded and already existing out there. This is basically to get us where we already in the deficit. That's where the $80 to $100 million goes. It's not creating a whole new list of projects that are pie in the sky. These are projects that we need to be accomplished. They're not being accomplished, and we're suffering, basically. I think we're economically suffering from opportunity. Because it's sort of about where, if we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the investment, we don't have the return. So we've lost that opportunity. To me, this is an opportunity, not an expenditure.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
So of the $80 million that you need for the capital projects that you've identified, but then you want it actually to go forward though, I understood, with increases in CPI, the changes in inflation and such. Maybe I just
Yeah, I think that $80 million has to be recognized that project costs will increase, but also revenue to the state will also increase also. I might defer a little part of that question. Steve, can you ask that question? Can you support that program?
Yes, we could. I mean, right now, we have a priority system to assign to every project. And we only can fund a certain level of that priority system every year. And then the bottom half of that, or much more than the bottom half of it, doesn't get funded. It does get rolled up eventually, but then right underneath that, you have more priorities coming up. So the system already exists for prioritizing and giving this money out in a reasonable fashion to ensure safety, number one. Right now, I would say a vast majority of our funding goes to pavement preservation because all our pavements are in really poor shape, and we can't do anything else but that right now. And that's where our program really is. So there's a system in place. Is it as advanced as what North Carolina's done? No, but I think maybe that's what Greg hit on, where we have a little further study of how to develop a program that has more money in it, how to reallocate that funding to both the needs as well as the economic future of those areas.
So ours is right now just a project-specific allocation and prioritize. Someone prioritize 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This $80 million is gone, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, unless someone else jumps to the front.
But if you want to do things like air cargo funding, economic development funding, things like that, that doesn't really exist in our program today.
I was saying the major tenets, same thing North Carolina has, safety, pavement preservation. We've got all those, but we have all that in the metric of what we look at. They further categorized their airports and the different criteria, which we haven't done. But again, we have a ranking system, but it's top down, and then as Steve said, when you get there, that goes to the top of the list next year, but you get another calls for projects, they get sorted and filtered, and there you go. So so the one thing and I'm glad you raised the question, because I want to make sure everybody understands, we do have a great system. It's just a matter of, you can only go so far with the revenue you have. There's certainly other enhancements, and I really do like the breaking the airports down into categories, and then there's other nuances of how you can allocate into these things we've heard about today that are different. I'm probably jumping into our afternoon session here, but there's other ways you can administer a program, and those are nuances that can be understood and talked about, and some great examples given here today from other states. So, but I didn't want anybody to think that the same thing to the question is, here's a number that's sort of arbitrary, it's not backed up. We certainly can back up the need for sure, and we've done that in our statewide plans, and each airport's got their own plan as well. So as we've heard about, so there's demonstrated, the need is demonstrated, the execution is the afternoon conversation.
Chairman Crowe, you said lunch was going to be here about what time?
3.
About 3 o'clock, okay. That'll give us a little time to take a break. I am going to unless there's any other questions for Mr. Byrd, we'll take a break. Everybody, the
restroom, you go towards the double bath doors on the far side, go down the hallway. There's 1 gallon of unsweet tea, 2 gallons of unsweet tea.
One of the things that you know, the end all of end all is the written report. And so, I'm picking on Ben and Abby. Said Abby, you want to come up here and join us?
Mostly Ben.
Mostly Ben, to write up a report. And to me, I guess I'm going to let Ben kind of moderate. Said a little bit about where do we want to go? Where do we want to? You know, we've seen some other things. We've seen what's working and what's not working, and we got to come up with a plan to, you know, what do you want your legislature to do moving forward?
And one thing I've picked up on as we've gone through all the meetings we've had is that I think that, at least from listening to stakeholders and from some of my talking to the departments and talking to the members of the committee, is that I think that everyone recognizes what the needs are, and it's been really illustrative as we've listened to a lot of speakers in seeing you know, what other states have done to address that. But I guess now, you know, we've heard from Georgia DOT about what the spending gap is for the plans that they have. We know how the money's allocated, but to bridge that gap, I guess the question is where the lift is finding out where, if we are going to allocate additional funds to support airport infrastructure, how does that, where does that come from? You know, we've pretty much heard a similar refrain from most of the airports in terms of like what they need. We're talking about the hangar waiting list. We're talking about ramp improvement. We're talking about runway of lengthening and the condition thereof. That seems to be, you know, and also the safety, hearing about wildlife strikes and that manner of stuff. So we know what the needs are. I guess the questions in terms of recommendations, what is the state of Georgia going to be able to do about it? Because when we're talking about the gap in spending, especially compared to our sister states in North Carolina and Florida, it's pretty dramatic. And so I guess when we're talking about recommendations, you know, are the recommendations we're going to have from today going to be about addressing, you know, committing to that kind of stable, expected funding, but where's it going to come from? And so I'd just be interested in hearing from the members. One, you know, is this something that, you know, Georgia can spend the money on, and if so, you know, what does that look like? And so I'll just kind of open it up to if anyone has any thoughts or insights, because y'all are the ones who are either, you know, stakeholders in this or elected to represent the people in the purse strings.
I've got a question. To me, it's can you afford not to do what has been discussed? At what point is there a tipping point that we have put off so many safety problems? We talk in terms of projects, but in actuality, Steve's saying he can't keep up with safety issues. And when the runway gets to a point that it's just unsafe, the system is degrading, the entire state system is degrading, which my understanding it has over the last couple of years, because we have not had the funding to maintain for safety purposes only. At what point is that a tipping point that you can afford not to? And I don't know, maybe Robert and Steve can talk a little more eloquently about it. They know the numbers, they know the percentages. They know, you know, waiting 5 years to take care of a project, how much more is that project now costing versus, you know, if it was handled, you know, more promptly?
I'm gonna pick on locally, Sydney. One of the things, and anybody that wants to see the Jackson County Airport, we are going to take a van and ride over to the airport. It's about only a mile away. But right now, they've got about 5,500 feet of airport, Sydney runway, and one of the things that they would like to do is get it out there to 6,000. We heard, 6,000 is kind of a, bigger jets and get, what's growing here. There's a cost of inflation is going crazy, but that's not really a safety thing until you gotta land the plane and you need that last 500 feet of runway, which we heard alternatives to it. For me, that's one of those things that, how much does that expand their business? So for me, as we look at projects, you can classify them into safety. One of the things, and for me, the purpose that I'm excited about our look into the air travel is, what do we do to improve business, that return on the money that you're talking about. So, I don't know if you want to chime in on Jackson County's, but, for me, I know I use Athens over here, the Athens airport. Their runway was failing. Said they actually had their taxiway. Said what's it cost in damage to a plane? You bring a plane in there, a chunk of asphalt gets sucked up in a jet, you got a problem. So those are the kind of things that safety issues, play a part. What's it cost you in lost business, lost opportunities for somebody not to land at your airport?
I'm Tom Strong, the manager of the local airport. We've got 5,000 feet, and definitely we are seeing larger and larger aircraft coming in to support the business that are growing around us. Larger and larger aircraft on a runway that wasn't really built for that. It degrades faster. It causes them to make decisions, maybe safety decisions they normally wouldn't have to think of. How much fuel should they leave in the ground versus take with them? And maybe now they've got to make an intermediate stop before their next destination. We don't want to do that if we can get away with it. So, yeah, just those little changes. I mean, huge things for the businesses around us, but also if you bring the business in first before the infrastructure's there, you kill what you have, and it just gets more expensive to bring it up to standards later. I agree. I worked at a fairly large flight department for a number of years, and there was a standard, and anything below the standard didn't mean you couldn't go in, but you definitely, like you talked about, you had to evaluate your restricted performance standards. You had to maybe limit your weight. You had to maybe leave critical passengers, critical team members off the aircraft. Here you go, you bought a 10-passenger aircraft, but you can only fly 6 into this particular airport for safety considerations. So that over time, that company will decide to go elsewhere because they need those folks on board. They're part of this critical team to come in and evaluate, do business, whatever they have to do. They can't afford to keep leaving them at home. They need to bring them to where they need to be. So that is a strong consideration. You're exactly right.
Couple things on about where the money comes from. I think it's important, many of y'all probably know this, but on the airport improvement program money that we get from the FAA, it cannot be used for maintenance. So once you build this nice runway or whatever, to maintain it is back to the local part. Now, that's at the federal level, and someone has talked about trying to get the law changed to where it allows a certain percentage of your AIP entitlement money to maintain previous AIP projects. But so the kind of give and take on that. The other part is, I believe the way North Carolina did it is they looked at what taxes were already being collected and that would tie back to airports, and then directed that through legislation that's got to be going to the airports. And so their biggie was excise tax on rental cars. What was it, 85% of the rental cars in North Carolina originate from an airport. I think it was the staff. So they, instead of saying, okay, which 15% don't, I think they just said all rental car excise tax goes to that airport fund. So if we could look at existing fees and taxes that are out there already in place, and then look at redirecting or adding airports into that. Like say like the $5 which says transportation, you know. I know that our airport in Valdosta is benefiting from the Transportation Improvement Act, the new control tower. So we are seeing some of those transportation dollars. But so if we're looking at existing, we're already bringing the money in, so we're not actually increasing a tax or changing a tax. We're just aiming it differently.
And that's interesting because not only was it addressed today regarding rental cars and hotel motel, but something else that was referenced today that I've also heard in prior meetings was looking at rerouting the ad valorem tax on base aircraft to go back to airports specifically because that is something that could potentially alleviate the problems of the waiting list for hangars. And that was one topic, I'm glad you touched on it, that I kind of wanted to see, you know, if that was the will of the communities to maybe take another look at if that's feasible as a way to provide funding for this.
Ben, if I may, on the ad valorem tax, Dalton is a city-owned airport located in the county of Whitfield, so we're surrounded by county property. How the ad valorem tax works there is if you have an aircraft owner or a corporation that is actually based in the county, then they're taxed on that asset based on the county structure. If they're in the city, obviously they're on the city structure. So there's a lot of aircraft that's based in Dalton that the Dalton that maintains the airport do not receive any revenues from the ad valorem tax structure. It all goes to the county. And the county does not put any monies into the airport whatsoever.
Is the city in the airport, is the airport in the city limits?
It is not. The airport is not in the city limits. It is a city-owned, it's a city-owned property. To annex it, we've got to annex a lot of property to get to it.
Legislatively, you can annex it. You don't have to be contiguous on legislative annex.
Well, then that's certainly a possibility we need to look into.
And that might also be, if you've got other municipal-owned airports where the law has changed to where it's actually where the airplane is based, not where the company is based.
We've looked at that, and right now, I mean, of course, it's where the company is based or the individual is based, but we would like to look at that as a source of revenue coming into the city that has to maintain it. The other thing that we're proactively trying to do and have been for some time is to get the city to be a joint city-county owned airport so that we could get some budget monies coming from there. And we're also sitting right next to another county, probably 2 miles away. And we're even thinking about, can we incorporate and become like a regional airport where we can get into another county's, we're supporting their economic development through the use of that airport, but nothing comes back if it goes outside the city of Dalton. And most of the economic development that's flying in is looking at county property more so than they are city property.
Ben, I want to point out, the state of Georgia has come up with money in the past for airports. Back in 2006, Sonny Perdue created a program called Air Georgia. That created about a $100 million pot for airport improvements in the rural airports of the state of Georgia. And that money came from the tobacco money. I think that pot of money is dried up, I'm not sure. But in addition to that, there were 2 other governors that have allocated money direct to airport improvements and airport projects in small airports. Nathan Deal came up with $35 million. And one of the other governors came up with another $30+ million allocation. I don't know where those dollars came from, but the state of Georgia has come up with dollars before. So, you know, I think if we go back and look at what's happened in the past, these isolated situations, and see where that money came from, maybe that'll help. That way that gap you talked about is not as dramatic, because there's precedent for it. And again, you know, I mentioned the rideshare tax, but that's legislative directive to transit. But if the legislature were ever going to do anything there, that may be a future source of funds. And then the hotel room night tax, again, is directed to transportation. And I think if we unravel that a little bit and see where that's going, and maybe there may be some opportunities there.
I think constitutionally, I'm not sure we could do anything with that. Can I answer that? Can I just chime in?
Yeah. It's a round thing.
I asked the chairman, I should ask the chairman if I could speak. House members get treated a little bit different. But anyway, I think that's already tied up. And so one of the things that you're looking at, those funds that came previously, you know, just came from the general fund and were appropriated through our appropriations process. So if you don't have a dedicated fee stream, so excise tax on rental cars, for example, that showed up here, the sales tax on the other things. So if you don't have a dedicated income stream, you are subject to changes annually in not just the state of the economy, but in the political process of who jumps ahead of you. There's different priorities that are established every year. And so if you're subject to those changes, the dedicated fee and the fees that we are already dedicated, they're already funding something. You know, those are already allocated to specific models that they've planned out in ahead. So you either look at an additional dedicated fee or hopefully an appropriation through the general budget. But I don't think those that we talked about before can be touched. Those seemed like we had to vote on those in a constitutional amendment and where those goes. So it's because I've tried. Trust me, I've tried to touch those, and you can't.
Would that be the same for if, I think it would probably require a constitutional amendment as well if we were going to put a tax on rental cars? Or no, that could be direct legislation? In which case, you know, is that, I don't know, is that something worth looking more into?
Some history, and it's history, so I don't know that it's accurate now, but back in 2015, when it was looked at, the rental cars, on aggregate, the number one rental car user was a Georgian due to the auto repair crashes by far. But if there was some nuance that if it originated at an airport or associated at an airport, it might be a different conversation. But that was looked at back in HB 170 as a revenue stream. I don't remember the numbers unless you do the total. Yeah.
But is it the original, the house angle was that?
Well, with 170, one of the other things was the $5 hotel motel per night, and every time I had to pay that little thing, it's not outsiders that's paying it. I'm paying it, so.
Thank you.
Similar. You're very welcome.
You got there, didn't you?
Yes, sir. Good roads and bridges.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I think we've heard every presentation we've had talks about the economic benefit that comes from investing in our airport infrastructure. And I don't envy y'all's role of actually having to try to determine, because nobody wants to raise fees or taxes, or that conversation's never a fun one to have. But I think if we can center whatever that fee structure, tax structure is on those areas that are directly benefiting from that economic development impact, whether it's construction, whether it's rental cars, hotel, motel, whatever, we can tie as close as we can tie it to say, look, if we take $1 and invest it, we get 10 back on it, that I think will make it more palpable to voters and to your fellows in the Senate and the House on it. It's not going to be a conversation because nobody wants to raise taxes. But I think to the extent we can tie it to things that are going to see a direct benefit from that investment, it might make it more palpable.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I don't, somebody here representing Delta or the Atlanta airport? Edward?
No, I represent the Georgia airport, that's it.
Okay. I guess, Commissioner, I'll take the bull and either get gored by the horn or whatever. But for me, the one thing that I want to hear from y'all, you heard North Carolina talk about, okay, they don't do a jet fuel tax. The will of the legislature has been in years past, hey, we think there ought to be a jet fuel tax out there. We've passed it twice. Said it got vetoed one time, and in the last go around, the Department of Revenue said, you know, we don't think that's the right case. Y'all are off the wrong clock. Said so you figure it what you want to, but for me, I would ask our partners in the air travel business, you know, my friend Jim Butterworth always told me, who was in the Senate and a pilot for Delta, he says, let me promise you, if Georgia has a jet fuel tax, said, we might buy a little bit of fuel in Georgia, but when we land that plane somewhere else, it's gonna be full of fuel before it comes back to Georgia. I don't know how it works, said I would like to know, and some of you that are more knowledgeable on that, kind of what that means and how it would impact our state. You know, we have the world's busiest airport. I do have some of my colleagues in the Republican caucus of the Senate that wanted to take it over, and I kind of did all I could to thwart that. My friends over in the House, I will give them credit. They didn't bite on that apple, but for me, what are y'all's thoughts on jet fuel tax?
Well, Mr. Chairman, there's been, going back in history, there's been several attempts to try to corral those dollars when they were collected back at airports. For a number of years, the state of Georgia was operating in violation of FAA rules and using the tax dollars collected on aviation fuel sales for the general fund. The FAA requires by law that those dollars go to airports, so we thought that was a good opportunity for funding. To your point, the last calculation, Steve, I think that would result in approximately $40 million a year from the most recent calculations. Is that still accurate?
That was part of the, the 4%. We were going to be able to get it from the federal government at 1 of that percent. So that was the correct figure at $40 million. But if you calculated the whole 4%, it was like way over $100 million.
So the problem that we always run into is, Delta and the competition issue. If you notice, North Carolina said they exempted fuel because they've got a major airline hub in their state. So they exempted fuel. That's what that's the leverage American Airlines has on the legislature. You all have been through this before, I think, and you know the leverage that Delta has on the legislature. And if we go down that route, I think you'll experience the same type of pushback from the airline. It's difficult for the airports in the state, especially those airports that are served exclusively by Delta, to advocate for something like that, because Delta can say you shouldn't be advocating for that, we'll pull service. So it puts the airport in a very difficult situation where Delta is the exclusive air carrier. So those are some landmines there. It is a good source of revenue. We've tried several times. I don't know that it would get done by the end of the day.
As I understood, North Carolina is they only exempted jet fuel sales tax for the airlines.
Air carriers.
Air carriers, not for everybody else.
That's right.
And I think right now we have a waiver for everybody. Or
We don't.
for everybody.
No, it's just simple in the legislation. Just a little background on that. As you probably know better than I, Delta has a strong interest in what we're doing here, and Delta's. I'm not going to speak for Delta, but this is what Delta says. They contribute so much to the Georgia economy through other taxes, the employment base and the headquarters and everything else they do. So they are an active contributor to the state Georgia economy. Putting us, the jet fuel put in a competitive disadvantage of how their marketing goes. They're very much interested in our development of our state, but they said they've done their fair share. The point that North Carolina brought forward was, again, this is an investment. And I personally would love to give somebody $1, get $25 back or $10 back, whatever the number is. So it's not necessarily how much you spend, it's how much you make. And that's where the North Carolina legislature said. I asked them, I said, how did you approach that? And I don't envy you, but your position, they said, it's our job. If you gave me such a good proposal, I'll find the money because it's in my best interest. That's what the North Carolina State Legislature had. Florida, there is a small tax on jet fuel. Actually, they pay less than 2 cents. It's actually 1.87 cents per gallon. It's not even a percentage. So it's a lot less. There was a big fight going on there, and they negotiated a very small amount that they do pay. But it's arguments going on in all the states too. All the airlines are going to fight heavily that we don't want to pay. We pay our share otherwise. We don't want to pay the fuel. Then they go back to the fact the state's going to get their investment back because they're proven. I kind of like the idea. North Carolina did as far as, and Florida did, is recognizing projects that are really important to the state of Georgia. Not every airport in Georgia, 103 airports, some of them just stabilize the airports, make sure it's safe, but other ones have economic growth potential. That's where the money needs to go.
If you, like Representative Perkle says, if the Tooth Fairy showed up with $80 million, how would y'all propose that you'd say, look, how are we going to direct how that money's spent? Who's the decision maker in that process?
So if we had a natural leader in the room, that's the Georgia Airports Association. They would serve as the conduit and the orchestra leader to start that discussion amongst the commercial airports and all the general aviation airports. General aviation airports are currently getting about $12.5 million a year, $14.5 million a year. I would see that number growing to $20 million under the new framework as proposed. And then commercial airports, somewhere between 20 million and 60 million. But I don't think we'd have a problem coming to consensus with the commercial airports, and I don't think we'd have a problem coming to consensus with general aviation airports, as long as the general aviation airports knew that there would be extra dollars coming their way that they could spend. It's not just the extra dollars; it's got to be dollars that's spendable, and that's where those other factors come into play that were recommended to you today, as far as spendability and local share.
Now, I'm not sure where, and I really appreciate the Airport Association and the membership and the involvement. Of course, there's a little challenge that the Airport Association is an association of private organization. Usually the legislature has a little question about, oh, here's the money, y'all go figure out how to spend it. So you gotta come up with okay, is that what you're gonna do? You're gonna, the legislature's gonna empower the Airport Association to come up with that? Or, Russell, you have a little larger budget than most of us. Said what would you do?
Well, I don't know that we have to do things a lot differently. Again, we've got the plans, and airports have their AIPs. You know what the work is that need to be done and where money can be encumbered and expended. So I think there's some nuances, again, especially from North Carolina's presentation, that are unique, but again, those are different, ultimately 4 different programmatic approaches. So with enough revenue, you can do the programmatic approaches. If you don't change the revenue, you're just slicing your pie in lots of little thin pieces that don't benefit anybody. So, but I think if you come with we could come up with programmatic approaches, 2 that can inform the legislature, could inform the association, could lobby. Obviously, North Carolina even left a discretionary component out of one of their programs. So that still could, if there's a emerging, let's just say it happens to be Jackson County, there's just a little thing down the road called SK Batteries, and when they build their next phase and the next phase, and who's going to come to be near them, maybe there's discretionary that says, here's money that needs to go for this important economic development project in Georgia. That can still be discretionary because it fits within the bounds of the programmatic. But I would suggest that, we stay the course in programs and, safety payments, all the things that everybody's talking about in the tiers you go in. We certainly can look at broadening our horizons of how we look at that prioritization. So I think the tools are there. The tools and toolbox are there. The information's there. It's depending on how you want to form it and take it into different programs. But it's hard to take it into different programs at the funding levels we're at. I'll just say, obviously, funding is not for me to opine on or suggest. Based on the conversations here, I'd ask one thing is, what's the elasticity for GAs on 1 cent, excise tax, one penny excise? Where's the elasticity in that when somebody decides to fly across the border to Florida or to South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, you name it, North Carolina, South Carolina? Is that revenue, what's the elasticity? I know on HB 170, everybody was fearful that when that change of of gas tax went into place, everybody was supposed to fill up the night before because gas was just going to go up, and it didn't. So, I mean, is there elasticity? I don't know. I don't know what our surrounding states have for just avgas and jet fuel in general. You know, is that something that's a detractor as well if you're looking for additional revenue? That's a question.
In Dalton, we monitor what we sell our fuel and avgas for with all the surrounding areas within 100 miles. And often, you know, you can look at a facility that might sell, say, 10 cents per gallon more. That really doesn't cause us to lose, I'm not talking about us, but anyone to lose business, because it's a lot more expensive to fly an aircraft to another destination just to pick up fuel. And there's not an aircraft operator that wants to carry excess fuel, because that additional weight is a big burden on fuel burn. So airlines saying they would go tanker somewhere else and then fly into Atlanta, that's just not going to happen, because the cost to do that will far exceed them paying a tax in Atlanta. Plus also the weight and balance, as was mentioned earlier by others, would be a big issue if they've got a full flight. So they'd have to leave some fuel off of these small commuter planes. So we don't see that as a big issue, as if the fuel rates are a little higher. And we've had not really any complaints with our local folks. You know, no one likes a tax, but we've not heard anything local.
I think comparatively speaking, the state of Georgia, of course, charges ad valorem tax on the value of aircraft that are based here. The state of Florida does not. The Georgia aircraft owners threaten to go to Florida, but they never do, because they want to be near where they need to be. So I think the same thing would hold true if their fuel prices are higher.
Thanks for that.
Mr. Chairman, I think back to the how do you spend that $80 million or $100 million that comes in. As the Commissioner said, that existing 5-year plan for every airport exists out there, gets updated every single year. I think moving forward, you would have to change your mindset a little bit, because there's not some of these projects that the airports would really like to see, like hangars and other things like that, may not be on those because they're not going to be eligible for funding under the current mechanism. But I think the bones are there. We've got a system that everybody's used to, that you're doing that, and it gives criteria back to the Georgia DOT to be able to say, hey, here's what those priorities are. That if we've got that bigger pot of money, we can generate the projects. They're out there. A lot of them are on those plans now, but there's a lot of them are sitting on the sidelines that are not on those plans that can be added before y'all get the governor to sign the bill.
Mr. Chairman, if we could investigate further the rollover piece of this from one year to the next. I'll give you an example. Let's just say that we've got a project that we want to do. We want to build a new joint aviation terminal. It's not yet designed. Okay? But let's just say this money is attached to something where I've got to have bids in hand by March the 1st of next year. And I haven't even gotten it designed yet, so I won't have a bid in hand. But if I know that money's there and it can be rolled over, and we're going to say, yeah, we're going to support you in your joint aviation terminal, let's work through this design process and this, you know what I mean? To give us some more flexibility on the timing. And I don't know if that's policy or regulatory or legislatively driven for the
I can promise you what we're going to aim for is, you know, when we crack the nut, okay, we want it to stay cracked for a long time. So there'll be, like, one of the things, I'll use the DOT program, used to be called LARC, said, no telling what you call it today, but you know, that was a local area resurfacing program that if you, in a small community, you might have enough to pay from here to the door. But you get to a bigger community, well, okay, how do I save that up from one year to the next? So that you've got okay, here's what we want to do. You try to work your plan so that you've got, we can do, you know, a larger expenditure every so often than versus dribbling it out a little bit year to year.
I think that's a good thing to put in the report, Ben, is let us look at that as it relates to this general fund money. So that's a state issue. It's not a DOT issue. If it's not utilized, and utilization is the word, and if it's encumbered, then it can go multiple years. I think the issue is, and we'll have to talk about this, is to operationalize that are we gonna basically encumber the dollars in your example, no offense, and we know you do a great job, Austin, but you know, if what happens if we encumber that and then that project never moves forward, then you've got state dollars that have been encumbered. So it's a little bit of the commitment and the progression of the project that we don't want to encumber until you know you can get there, but that's a chicken and egg, you're not going to commit to spend local dollars unless you know you can get the state dollars at the end to see it all the way through. So a little chicken and egg. I think that's fine for us to look at and reevaluate that from a practice point of view, but on the state point of view, at a state level, if those dollars are not encumbered, they certainly lap or certainly roll back to the general fund to be outside the GDOT to be determined what to do with it. From a former OPB guy, is that right?
What you have to be careful of is, as I know, there have been commissioners in years past that sometimes would line up dozens and dozens of projects for the same community, but that community would never take action on them. And I dealt with one of those, unfortunately, as a county manager. We had projects that were 3 decades old that when I started there that were, it was interesting to say the least. I think Commissioner McMurray might know that county in particular.
Chairman, is that something that could be evaluated in terms of like having the localities with these airports some kind of buy-in to encumber funds, like some kind of, to give them some purchase and, this is what we want to do, here's the money that we're going to, basically have set up for that, and to trigger the state funds that we can encumber for with a rollover?
You can do that. One of the things I want to caution you, because I see, somebody said paving a mile of road gets you a mile down the road, but an airport gets you anywhere. One of the challenges that we face in Georgia is we have 2 Georgias. We have the urban areas and then we have the rural areas. So when you get to a rural area and you said, hey, what do they have to put into it locally? What can you generate in a rural poor county? Said so you gotta be careful that you don't put that carrot too far out there where they're not going to go after it. And to me, I want to try to make sure that we're developing all of Georgia, because an airport's truly a place that, you can be in the middle of nowhere, but yet you're always on the earth. And to me, I think you made that analogy there that it's important for a lot of rural communities and the economic development. And that's where that growth in that area will be tied to, but they may not have that local revenue funds to jump into something.
Let me offer some suggestion on the carryover. Federal program does have a carryover, but it has a certain time limit. And also has a reimbursement program too, which the state doesn't have. So there is some control on it. We could roll over our federal entitlement money 3 to 5 years based on the type of airport, but if we don't do that 5 years, we lose it. So there is a way to control it in some way that you don't get into decades of projects hanging out. But that tool is very helpful. It would be extremely helpful to this project.
And the design will go through.
Carryovers 3 years or $450,000. That's April. Yes, federal.
That's helpful.
Does $450,000 get very far in some of these airport projects I look at?
Well, that's because their time is 150 a year. If it was higher, it'd be more. It's basically 3 years. That's basically what it is. I have an air carrier airport, and you get $1 million a year for Brunswick, and we can carry it over. Not more than 450.
Generally, it doesn't go very far, but it all depends on the project. If we can on certain projects, and we cannot on others. They're restricted dollars. Safety related. But Ben, as I recall talking to North Carolina, the original allocations came out of the general fund, and they were able to keep that going and growing. I don't know what the mechanism is for them to go back each year and what source of funds they're tapping into, but as I understand it, still.
Well, they're getting theirs all from the general fund, I understand. They did not do the excise tax on the others,
But to your point about each year going back to appropriations,
yeah,
they found a way to continue through year over year and have predictable dollars out of the general fund without, or somehow working with appropriations. And maybe it's the two champions they had at their legislature.
One of the questions I do want to ask, because I hear people talk about hangars and how big the need for hangars is. I know everybody in here, and I'm kind of, for me, that's a hard one to pick. Now, I'm going to pinch her because she's over here being real quiet, but Senator Halper and I were talking, and she said, you know, what do we do to help some of these communities with the bank? You know, and I'll just pick on it. If the state said, all right, hey, we're gonna build a fund, and in my case, I'm just gonna use the example of hangars. So if an airport came to us and said, hey, we want to borrow some money from the state to go build these hangars, we know there's a revenue stream that'll come back from them that we can pay that debt. Would that benefit some of the airports? I mean, you know, is that something? Could you pay the debt service on it? Said if it were quote interest free. If the state came up with interest free money.
A lot of, and the other airport manager can chime in here. A lot of the benefit for the hangar does not come back to the airport. A hangar as a business model is a terrible investment, because by the time you have it paid for, it's worn out. But what it is they're buying gas, they're creating jobs, they're doing all this other stuff.
Paying ad valorem tax.
Exactly, that you can't necessarily tie directly back, that the airport doesn't derive direct benefit from in a lot of these ways. A lot of them are intangible. So our airport authority looks at hangars as more of a providing of service to create the environment for all this other stuff to go.
Well, my question is, and I was a county manager where we had an airport, we built hangars and things there in our airport. So to me, the rent on the hangars basically covers the cost of the building. So and for me, that was a no-brainer. I'm like, why the hell wouldn't you do this? Because you're going to have a plane paying taxes in your community, helping you, you know, with your fuel purchases and the things there. But I know there's some communities that have a hard time seeing that math. And for me, I kind of liked her concept of, you know, is that a possibility that you know, I look at y'all's airports that you're managing, the Airport Association. Is that something that would be of value to rural airports?
We're definitely looking for a hangar program, definitely. Extremely valuable to definitely rural airports.
But what if it even extended beyond just hangars, right? What if it's more broadly the concept of kind of a state bank fund, right? Where you can access those dollars at low interest rate or no interest rate at all, but you know that you have access without having, you know, a lot of extra money that you then got to service on that debt, but will give you access to the money to be able to do the projects that then fund the economic development work that we know will come from it. So it's kind of a, you know, recirculating, because we'll get the money back. $1, you said $1 in gives us $88 back. So we know that we're going to get the benefit of it when you look at it across the entire system.
So if we're not building it, the money's not coming in at all, it's going somewhere else.
Edward?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, you might want to consider taking a look at SR 26, which was the bill, with proposed constitutional amendment proposed by Senator Harper that deals specifically with utilizing state bonding authority to provide loans and money available to general aviation airports for just this purpose.
And I told Senator Halpern about GFA and what we do in water and sewer projects, and you know, I could see a similar type situation for airports. You know, if it's so inclined, I just, you know, for me, I just pick on hangars as okay, because there is a truly revenue stream that's generated by the cost of construction. So it's going to be hard to you want to do a runway or something like that, but that's where for me, I want to know if that's an opportunity and how we do it. So, and I do want to let you know, Senator Harper, who was actually the primary sponsor on SB 86, said they apologized for him not being able to be here. He was stuck in Tipton today. He gets around, but he just doesn't get around fast enough.
Anyway, SR 26, I think, could answer y'all's specific desires to do just that. And it's already in the hopper.
And answer your question, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be very helpful for some airports instead.
And I did want to, for context, it's not in my notes. I'd have to go back and see, but I believe when we were down in St. Simon's, Mr. Ovitz testified regarding that there are states that do have the self-replenishing grant program.
Minnesota. State of Minnesota.
State of, I
was
was thinking,
1959.
and it seemed from the data that he presented there, it was a very successful program, and I thought that that might be an opportunity where it's not a continual allotment, which it's not, I'm not foreclosing that that's something that we should be considering, but it is a way for some reliable funding that can be specifically targeted to rural airports.
Tool in the toolbox.
Yep.
To your point, Dalton looked at that very thing about getting loans or working through that. We went through One Georgia, which then was broken out to Air Georgia, and we worked with Nancy Cobb for 3 years on getting monies to build hangars in Dalton. And we had it worked out, and there were three instruments that we needed to sign and agree to. Mayor and council agreed to it. But just before that all got approved, there were 21 other stipulations that we had to agree to, and then it went from a 0% loan to a 3% loan. And after 3 years, we just gave up. And the bureaucracy of having to work through that, and just things changed each and every year that added to it, and the mayor and council elected just to walk away from it, and we did. And fortunately, the mayor and council had gone through it so much that they agreed to pull out of the general fund about $1 million to build 20 hangars, and that was the last hangars that we built in 2008. And they were filled in 6 months, 3 months, and they've been full ever since. So for the small communities, we certainly think that is a good program for those that can support certain funding and have monies to be able to put into it, just not all of the monies, then that there would need to be some other types of opportunities that are there.
Talk about hangars for the benefit of the committee. Pennsylvania has proposed a legislation that hangar development would fall under different building standards. Because Hope's not here, she had to leave, she was sick, but she brought up the fact that the expense of building a hangar is extraordinary. And just recently, associations fought back from fire codes associated with smaller hangars. So, interesting to see what comes out of Pennsylvania, but the fact that if we could cut down the cost of building a hangar, that'd be very beneficial to GA Airport. It's extremely beneficial. It's really a shed.
Do you know where that's at in the legislative process?
It's been proposed in this legislative session.
I'm all ears for, I told you, a lot more brains on that side. Said so you got something you want to bring, throw out there to our group, bring it. Because that's what we do, is we steal other people's ideas and put them into the law. So.
Well, Ben, I think today the committee was presented with a number of specific recommendations, and I'd suggest that you look at those, and if there's any questions that we can talk about those moving forward. Because I think we've added, we put some items out there that could be included in the report, and strong suggestions. So that's a good starting place.
The one that I'm going to have to choke on, I know my friend up in Dalton won't like it, but taking all the ad valorem tax and putting it back into the airport. That's one I don't have a big enough wand to wave that. The reason that it was real easy for me as a county manager, got to remember, I spent 10 years as a city manager, 10 years as a county manager, but I didn't have any problem putting money to improve our airport, runways, jet fuel, better facilities, everything else, because the investment that was brought back in tax dollars to do that. And so for me, if you said, oh, well, that money's only going to stay in the airport and it's not going to help, with the rest of the school system and the what's going on with roads and that kind of stuff, it's going to be a tough sale. I'm realistic that so my mom named me Frank, and I'll just tell you, that shit, pardon me, that's not going to fly.
We understand that perhaps maybe some portion of it or something along those lines could be considered. We want to keep that economic engine driven. and being driven to bring in these aircraft, but also the industry, which is also going to pay the bigger portion of the city and county school tax.
Which might also incentivize surrounding counties to give into the airports that are benefiting their communities.
So, ideas? Hear from my sole house member that's left.
I think this portion I'm listening rather than.
I'm just trying to get them primed, you know. I figured you'd throw some seed out there and we'd collect it a little bit.
There was one thing that got brought up pretty regularly during our St. Simon's meeting. I think brought up a couple times at Atlanta as well. Was the concept of this is something that wouldn't necessarily have an impact on state funds, which is interesting. Is setting market prices for hangars. That was something that was a recommendation. That seemed like that was an issue for a lot of people. Was that there's such an imbalance in what people are, what it would cost to build these hangars. It's an impediment for a lot of airports in getting hangar space. And I was just interested if there was any feedback now with some benefit of hindsight, or having an opportunity to process that, or your own ideas about whether that would be something beneficial for getting more hangar space in small Georgia airports.
I'm not the lawyer in the room, but collusion, the bid rigging, that all comes into play. Look, the reason Jackson County has all the business coming to Jackson County is because they're aggressive. So they work to keep their tax rates low. They work to keep their infrastructure in place. So and that's where, for me, I don't think we want to get into a statewide. I think we can quickly be, you call it bid rigging, and Commissioner, I think that'd be against the law and the road project kind of stuff, and I don't think I want to do that in the airport hangar side of things, but sorry, Ben.
No, I'm just trying, like I said, timing.
Yeah.
So that's helpful.
A little aspect for that, I can go back to Florida. 60% of their program goes to hangars, 50% they'll pay for the hangar. But the stipulation is, it's not bid rigging, but they have to at least have competitive rates. So they're not collusion for the rate that the market determines they have to be competitive. In other words, they're going to give away a hangar.
All public airports, so just so you know, have to set policies, and whether you're an airport authority or whatever, said they, and I think the commissioner might know a little bit about which one this is, but for me, you got somebody that's doing something illegal, not putting it out for that violates the gratuities clause. Said they, I know of one individual that just got indicted for a little problem they had. So for me, I want to make sure you understand. You put it out there, said it's one of those that you can put requirements on it like, hey, you got to have a plane in the hangar. That's easy. But I don't think you want to get into, hey, we're going to do this hangar for $50 a year. That's violating the gratuities clause.
Ben, for information, in Dalton, the hangar payback is 17 years.
Okay. So if you had a hangar program that financed it for 20 years, you'd be in business.
That's right.
And that's why I say that I like Senator Halpern's idea there on how do we put the funds out there, and if it's amazing to me. I believe it was Hope that was talking about how many people wanted to be in her airport, but yet those same people were on waiting lists all over. And who was it that mentioned in one of our committees that they charged to be on their waiting list? PDK, yeah.
Wow.
Said they.
That's a good racket. That's a good racket to be in. So I've got one thing to add besides that's a great racket. I'd like to be able to do that.
Those are fundable. Those are fundable.
Wow, that's awesome. So as an economist, as a general rule regarding dedicated fees and taxes and such, I am personally not a big fan of taxing business inputs. We tax on the output. This is not to let any carrier or any business off the hook. But as a general rule, we don't tax electricity that goes into manufacturing your widgets, and the fuel that goes to raise the crops, it's gonna be taxed down the line. So as a general rule, now there are exceptions, but I think we need to find, if we look at, this is just my personal opinion, if we look at any dedicated stream, that it not include business inputs. You tax output and the final product and sales tax on.
Can you elaborate with an example?
I'd rather not, but
I'd be glad to have one, you know, be a lot easier. If you got an example of one that on the, what you would see as a tax on the input.
Well, the jet fuel tax would be one example for a business use and purpose. And so that's just I don't like that as a tax policy, but that's just one person mentioning. I like other dedicated revenue streams probably a little bit better than taxing inputs, business inputs.
All those businesses create products. Now, I serve on another committee called Freight and Logistics.
Yeah.
I promise you, we tax all those entities with motor fuel taxes.
Yeah.
Said I don't see the jet fuel tax as a different thing than a quote, a motor fuel tax. It's and to me, from a policy, that's why I'm trying to understand if there's something I'm missing in that picture.
Yeah.
You know, what we do from a policy standpoint. And this is where, for me, you know, y'all get to see a little bit of the inside and, okay, what people think. So we're gonna wrestle with this. Said that I'm sure, you know, the only problem is there's 180 house members and only 56 of us.
Praise the Lord.
Well, on the jet fuel tax, the other piece of it is that, especially then I thought it was really instructive that North Carolina said specifically that they decided to exclude their commercial. And I think, I don't know, I should have asked, but I won't proclaim to understand why exactly, but I imagine that part of that is you're larger, and again, you're like a Delta, that it really is, you know, this is the, you know, home state hub, would end up paying a lot of money towards that would then service airports they cannot even use themselves. So they would be carrying a larger burden, for example, than others in helping to make sure that the entire system is taken care of, but would not be able to use it, while they're also contributing in multiple other ways towards making sure that the state's economy stays healthy.
And that's one of those policy things that I'm sure we'll have a lot of discussion on. This is where our committee is going to make a report, and from that report, you know, here's things we see we like, here's things we see we don't like, here's things that, and so it's good to have that feedback. Josh, you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, as you approach the report, not necessarily endorsing, wouldn't endorse one way or the other, but certainly have sort of a broad spectrum of approach, knowing that you're introducing to the full General Assembly for consideration. And when you look back, obviously, we've had presentations about sort of how do you establish a long-term, larger, sustainable program. But we also have examples in our past, as mentioned, with the, you know, the one-time infusions geared towards a certain goal. So like when you go back to the Deal administration, it was targeting some of our kind of rural airports, getting runways lengthened. So you could have that in your, you know, as one goal is, you know, this an amount, maybe not just one fiscal year, but over a 3-year period, to target a certain dollar amount out of the general fund, and knowing that, you know, in precedent in both the governor during the Purdue administration and then during the Deal administration, those funds just flowed through the existing prioritization process. So we've got a blueprint for doing that. The other thing I'd note is going back to so we had the infusion during the Purdue administration, but just a little bit of history was then the Great Recession happened, and getting back to Chairman Purple's point, we found that in terms of the department, the intermodal budget following the Great Recession, our intermodal budget got limited down in general funds to just the bare minimum to match federal funds. And so a few years later, we began kind of growing back out of that, and thanks to the members of the General Assembly and Governor's Office, have gotten more of a program, so at least we can fund some state-owned projects. So that's a little bit, those are the tides when you're talking about, okay, well, if we're just gonna rely on the general fund, you know you'll go through those business cycles, and in that instance, that was a decision made. So, you know, we also have a precedent on the rail side, the short lines. Now, it's a little bit different because they're state-owned, but they set a target and said over a 3-year period, we're gonna break this into chunks to get a certain number of our rail lines upgraded to a higher standard and class. So there are precedents for kind of intermediate steps if you can't necessarily go for what's the long-term, larger sustainable, maybe something in the interim. So there are models for doing that we've done here in Georgia.
One thing I really appreciate about, and I'm not really sure what the will of the committee is on this, but about the concept of a grant program is that something you can take advantage of the one-time infusion and make that a sustainable source of funding going forward. And I'm just kind of curious if that's something that the committee sees as being worth including in the for recommendations.
I'd go back to, if I just pick on the hangar side of stuff, because I heard about that from a lot of folks. I said, okay, you got X number of dollars, we're going to put that out there in a bank that, you know, is going to pay back over years. And, you know, I think that would be a worthy thing to look at. I just, you know, might pick on my airport association to help us with guidelines or how you're going to do something like that. But for me, that's where, Steve, you know, I'm sure if you had that infusion, you could figure out how to make it work.
Definitely we can make it work. I did talk to Nancy Cobb, who ran the One Georgia program, and she ran a revolving loan fund. She said at a certain level of funding, it becomes very burdensome, very difficult to get the money out to the customers. If it's a larger fund and it's something that's more sustainable over a long period of time, you can cut down the burden, maybe the administrative cost of making that happen. And you know, I don't know what that number is, but we'd be glad to research it. We started researching all the other states and their revolving loan funds, so we'll have some good knowledge of that fairly soon. You can make it work if that's what it takes, but I think that's just one piece of it. To give you an example, I was a report manager for 35 years, so I'm going to speak from that experience rather than from my DOT experience. When you go out to look at the return on your investment for those hangars, you can never make that payback enough that you don't start hurting your business because you run off those customers because they can run to another airport and it's much cheaper. So until we can get over that competitive disadvantage of doing that, you're going to see people run around and change horses and do all that because they can save $200 a month on their hangars. It'll be hard for a while for people to be able to get over that disadvantage, because if you're charging $500 a month because you're paying back that loan, but the guy next door to you is only charging $200, they're all going to run to the cheapest place. It's hard to beat that.
If that spot's available.
Right.
It sounds like to me, I keep hearing, oh, nobody, you know, has a window open for me to go through.
At our most recent Georgia Airports Association conference, a question was asked of all the people, all the airport people in the room who had hangar space available or who needed hangar space, and almost every hand in the room went up.
I was there. And for me, you know, I'm just, okay, like musical chairs. If I take every chair out of here that's empty and I leave one of y'all standing up, that one person's asking for anybody that's got an empty chair, said well, there may be, how many empty hangars do we have and how many places do we have to fill them? So think about that. If there's only one person that doesn't get a chair, well, you want every chair in the room, you're trying to sit down. It doesn't take that much to drive. Well, I got people asking me about hangar space. So I'm curious what that real number is, and that's where I like that idea that, okay, you want to get on our waiting list, you're going to pay us a fee that's refundable. Okay, I think then you know who really wants the space. Who's you know, what your real number is. How many planes do you have out there that are sitting on the tarmac that need to be in a hangar? I don't know. Y'all know that.
If I come back to the infusion part, if that's a direction that it goes, if I could ask for some assistance from Steve, I believe on those runway projects that we were talking about, there was one community that couldn't do it because they couldn't come up with the matching funds. So if we could consider the match in this infusion process, that would be very helpful, I think. The 25% is kind of a bridge too far for a lot of communities, you know, as we've talked about before. But it's on the infusion, because it just creates disappointment. Everybody gets all excited. Yeah, we've got $3 million to extend our runway, and all of a sudden, it's just, you know, it doesn't go through.
Yeah. Is there anything else that y'all like to make sure gets into the report? I need to know. Committee members, audience. I don't want to beat a dead horse, and I know everybody's got things to do, and I do want to invite you to a tour over to the Jackson County Airport. Said if anybody that would like to go there, I think you'll.
Got a bus out in front of the building here. Yeah, we got a couple of them, so I'm gonna go take a look. It'll be the quickest tour you've ever taken. I can show you up close and personal. If you're not familiar with small airport operations, what our challenges are, I can definitely show you in about 5 to 10 minutes.
So,
Tom, can we drive there also?
Sure.
yeah.
There's just one thing that I think it's a recommendation, but it's a recommendation for further study that was something that was talked about a lot, and it's investment in the future. We've talked about, heard a little bit today about alternative fuels, and in prior meetings we've heard about electric planes and hydrogen fuel cells. I don't know if we've necessarily heard enough at this point, or if even there's enough data at this point for us to really make concrete recommendations about investing in Georgia's future regarding those subjects, but I think that it probably would merit as a recommendation that this is something that it's a problem that Georgia's going to have to face eventually, and it's something that we should maybe be proactive in actually getting the data on now. I was just if that's something that y'all are interested in.
Put it in there. You're right, you got the ink pen.
All right, it's in there.
So great news about having been here. And what our plan is we'll take in any written comments anybody wants to do for the next few days. At the middle of next week, I'd like to get those in, give Ben a chance to compile all of this, and we'll put it out there. Said to our committee members. Let our committee members look at it, said any changes or whatever you want to do on it there, and then we'll make a decision at that point whether we want to submit it or not. And if I can, since I'm the last one standing, said I'm going to leave it to me and Chairman Jaspers as to accept the report, you know, but I do want to hear back from committee members that have issues. And if it looks like, hey, this report is something that I think is representative of our work in the committee, we'll submit that report. We're not required to submit a report, but I think that there's a lot of good ideas. I know, you know, for me, this has been very helpful. I told y'all at the beginning of these meetings, I can land any airplane y'all put me in the pilot. Whether anybody lives is a whole different thing. But it is. I do appreciate all of the presenters and our folks for attending the meeting today. I think it's been very productive, and I want to thank y'all. And with that, we're gonna let Tom take us to wherever.
And if anybody needs my contact information, just see me out and give me a card.